Sharon Kinney Sharon Elizabeth Hall was born on November 30th, 1939, in Independence, Missouri, to parents Eugene and Doris. After her birth, Sharon spent some time growing up in Washington state, but by the age of 15, she and her family had returned to her birthplace. In 1956, at the age of 16, she met 22-year-old Brigham Young University student James Kinney at a church function. The couple dated from the summer of 1956 until autumn when James returned to university. Shortly after his departure, Sharon wrote him a letter explaining that she was pregnant with his child. Feeling responsible for Sharon and the baby, James returned to Independence, and the couple married on October 18, 1956. At the time, Sharon's age was falsely listed as 18. About a year later, the couple had a second, more formal wedding. By this time, Sharon, who had not actually been pregnant in the first place, had explained away her lack of baby by claiming she'd miscarried. However, she did eventually end up pregnant, giving birth to a daughter named Dana in the autumn of 1957. Following their second wedding ceremony, Sharon and James spent some time living in Provo, Utah before returning to Independence, where they both got jobs. Sharon as a babysitter and James as an electrical engineer at Bendix Aviation, where he mostly works nights. Sharon was keen on a life of luxury. She often spent large sums of money on frivolous things and attempted to live well beyond her means. She and James initially lived in a rented home next to his parents, but eventually built their own home, a ranch-style house elsewhere in the city. Eventually, Sharon grew restless. She'd had another baby, a boy named Troy, and she'd become bored of being a mother and a wife and yearned for excitement. As her husband was always working nights, she turned her attention to other men and began engaging in affairs. One of these relationships was with an old high school friend, John Balditz. By 1960, James was considering divorcing Sharon. He suspected that she was carrying on with other men and was also frustrated by her reckless spending habits. On March 18th, he spoke with his parents about the matter. Devout Mormons, James' parents encouraged him to stay and make their marriage work. He told them that Sharon would agree to the divorce if she was able to retain the house, keep custody of their daughter, and he paid her $1,000 in alimony. Still, James' parents insisted that the couple had simply hit a rough patch and just needed time to sort things out together. The next day, at around 5:30 p.m., Sharon heard a gunshot ring out from the direction of the master bedroom. She would later tell the police that when she went to investigate, she discovered the couple's 2-year-old daughter, Dana, sitting on the bed next to her father. He had a gunshot wound to his head, and Dana was holding his .22 caliber handgun. According to Sharon, James must have been cleaning the weapon when he decided to take a nap. He must have left the gun out as he went to sleep. Emergency services were promptly called to the scene, but James was declared dead by the time he arrived at the hospital. After his death, law enforcement began to investigate the incident. They were unable to obtain prints from the pistol's grip, however, and then failed to carry out testing for gunshot residue on both Sharon and Dana. Speaking with friends and relatives of the family, investigators discovered that the 2-year-old was known to play with firearms unattended. And in a test carried out by the police, Dana proved her ability to pull the trigger on a gun which was the same make and model of her father's. As there was no evidence to prove it was anything else, James' death was ruled as an accidental homicide. After the investigation was closed, James was buried and his wife collected on his life insurance policies, which were both the modern-day equivalent of around $230,000. Using this money, Sharon bought herself a new Ford Thunderbird from a car salesman named Walter T. Jones on April 18th. Walter and Sharon began an affair shortly thereafter. While Sharon wanted to get married again and thought Walter would be the perfect second husband, he already had a wife, 23-year-old Patricia Jones, his high school sweetheart with whom he had 2 children. In May that year, Sharon asked Walter to go to Washington with her. However, he declined her offer, and so she took her brother Eugene instead. Upon her return, she met up with her boyfriend and told him that she was pregnant with his baby. Sharon was sure that this would tip the scale in her favor, that Walter would have a strong reason to leave his wife and be with her. But Walter didn't announce that he would divorce his wife. Instead, he ended the couple's affair. Following the breakup on May 26th, Sharon decided to call Patricia and tell her that her husband was having an affair with Sharon's sister. The pair met to discuss the situation that evening. And according to Sharon, she dropped Patricia off a few blocks from home afterwards. But Walter reported that his wife never made it back to their house. He reported her uncharacteristic disappearance to the police the following morning. After notifying authorities, he began calling Patricia's friends and loved ones, hoping someone might have seen her. One of her friends, who carpooled with her to and from work, told him that the 23-year-old had mentioned being approached by a woman who wanted to meet her. Patricia had asked the carpool driver to drop her off at a street corner in Independence, and the friend noticed another woman waiting in a car nearby. They didn't recognize the woman, but when they gave Walter her description, it was immediately familiar to him. After hanging up, Walter called Sharon and asked if she had seen or spoken with his wife. She admitted that she had and informed him that she'd told Patricia of the affair. She then claimed that she'd last seen the 23-year-old when she dropped her off near their house. Sharon said that Patricia began speaking with an unknown man in a green 1957 Ford shortly before Sharon drove off. Walter and Sharon met later that evening where he insisted that she provide more details about Patricia's last known movements. He would later admit that he'd threateningly held a key to Sharon's throat. That same day on May 27th, shortly before midnight, Sharon and John Balditz, whom she had an ongoing affair with, discovered Patricia's body in the secluded Lover's Lane outside the city. She had been shot 4 times by a .22 caliber pistol, sustaining 2 wounds to her shoulder and 1 to her abdomen. The fatal shot was to Patricia's head. The bullet entered near her mouth at an upwards trajectory. She is estimated to have died at 9 p.m. on May 27th. Powder burns on the hemline of Patricia's skirt, which had been pushed up to her waist, indicated that the gun had been fired at close range at least once, and a white powdery substance discovered in her hair led investigators to initially theorize that she had been killed elsewhere and dumped in the secluded area. However, it was later determined that the substance was fly eggs. As no other crime scene could be located, the notion that this was not the crime scene was dismissed. Authorities attempted to locate the murder weapon and the bullet which had passed through Patricia's abdomen. They searched the Lover's Lane with the help of a group of Boy Scouts, but they were never able to recover the weapon despite going so far as to empty nearby bodies of water. The bullet, however, was eventually discovered buried in the ground underneath the body. On May 28th, Walter, Sharon, and John were all questioned. Both John and Walter admitted to dating Sharon in written statements. On June 1st, they both took polygraph tests which they passed. Sharon, however, would not put anything down in writing and refused to take a polygraph. Her brother, Eugene, was also questioned on March 31st, although he opted not to talk to investigators. That same day at 11 p.m., Sharon was arrested for Patricia's murder. The Jackson County Sheriff caught wind of her arrest and asked the prosecutors to consider a second murder, that of James Kinney. Following her arrest, Sharon was released on a $20,000 bond. Her preliminary hearing was scheduled for June 16th. Meanwhile, the gun used in the death of her husband was ruled out as being the murder weapon in Patricia's case. It was still locked up and under the possession of the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Reportedly, after James' death, attempted to get the gun back, but it was never returned to her. A male friend of hers then came forward and admitted that he'd purchased a .22 caliber handgun for the widow and registered it under her name, but she had asked him to re-register it under another. However, the weapon couldn't be found inside her house. Sharon originally claimed that she'd lost it on her trip to Washington and recanted this story and said it had gone missing at some point. In mid-June, Sharon's trial was delayed as she was heavily pregnant with her 3rd child. She gave birth to a second daughter, Marla, on January 16, 1961. On June 13, 1961, Sharon's trial for the murder of Patricia Jones began. The prosecution cited both Walter and a police lieutenant named Harry Nesbitt as evidence of the motive behind the crime. Nesbitt recalled that Sharon had stated, "I was afraid I was losing him. He acted funny." Meanwhile, Walter told the court about how he had broken off the relationship after Sharon told him that she was pregnant. The prosecution alleged that Patricia had been killed because Sharon wanted Walter all to herself. However, they were unable to definitively establish if she owned or had ever owned the handgun that killed the 23-year-old. After calling 27 witnesses, the prosecution rested its case on June 21. Meanwhile, Sharon's defense team concentrated on challenging the motive and means of the crime, arguing that the mother of three had no reason to kill Patricia and pointing out that the weapon, allegedly linked to her, had not been proven to be the murder weapon. The jury deliberated for just over an hour and a half before acquitting Sharon of the charge, finding too many loopholes in the prosecution's case. Bizarrely, immediately after the verdict was announced, one juror asked Sharon for her autograph. She obliged before she was returned to jail to await the next trial. On January 8, 1962, the jury selection process began for Sharon's second murder trial. The prosecution's case heavily relied on their contention that she was so interested in seeing her husband gone from her life that she was willing to pay for it. They had John Balditz testify about the time that Sharon had offered to pay him $1,000 to kill her husband. However, John undermined his own testimony by claiming that Sharon may have been joking. This caused the prosecution to attack the character of their own witness. The prosecution also explained that James and Sharon's marriage was on the verge of breaking down at the time of his death and noted that she'd been engaging in extramarital affairs which had caused the divide between the couple. They pointed out that Sharon would only be able to collect James's life insurance money if she was still his wife. Sharon's defense for their parts focused on the fact that much of the evidence in the case was circumstantial and called John Balditz a poor mixed-up kid who would sign anything and attacks the reliability of his testimony. They also observed that the police during their original investigation had thought James' demise was obviously accidental and presented testimony which supported the idea that James had often left guns in reach of his children, and that Dana could pull triggers on toy guns which were stiffer than the one on the .22 caliber which had killed him. The jury deliberated for over 5.5 hours before returning a guilty verdict on January 11. In April, Sharon was sentenced to life in prison and began to serve time in the Missouri Reformatory for Women. Her deceased husband's family continued to believe that Dana had been responsible for the death and that it had been nothing more than a tragic accident, stating, "We still don't feel that she committed murder." Sharon, for her part, told reporters that the verdict was a mistake. A week after her conviction, Sharon's lawyers requested that she be released on bond, which was supported by a petition signed by 132 individuals who thought she was innocent. However, the motion was denied as first-degree murder was not available offense. In response, Sharon's defense then requested that the conviction be vacated because the jury had delivered a verdict based on surmise and speculation rather than substantial evidence. They went on to list some errors that they alleged had been made before and during the trial. While this was denied by a judge in April 1962, the Missouri Supreme Court reversed the conviction in March 1963. A new trial was ordered on the basis of Sharon's defense having been denied adequate preemptory challenges during jury selection. She was denied bail in May that year, but 2 months later was released on a $25,000 bond which had been posted by her brother. As her second trial was scheduled, Sharon and her 3 children moved in with her mother. Her next trial began on March 23, 1964. But a mistrial was declared shortly afterwards because a law partner of one of the prosecutors had once been retained by one of the jurors. Sharon's third trial started on June 29 that year. A new witness testified for the prosecution, a female acquaintance of the mother of 3 who stated Sharon once joked that the witness should, quote, "get rid of the woman's old man like Sharon did." During this trial, Sharon took the stand to declare that she was innocent of all charges. A second mistrial was declared when the jury deadlocked 7-5 in favor of acquittal. Her fourth trial was scheduled for October of 1964. However, while free on bail, Sharon traveled to Mexico with her alleged new lover, a man named Francis Pugliese. She left her children in the care of their grandfather and traveled under the pretense that she and Francis were a married couple, using the name Jeanette Pugliese. Technically, although the bail itself didn't prohibit Sharon from traveling out of state, the company that posted her bail had conditions that required explicit written consent for such travel. Therefore, her leaving the state violated the conditions set by the company. In Mexico, Sharon and Francis registered as a married couple at Hotel Gin. While there, Sharon purchased a weapon, claiming that she felt unsafe because she was unfamiliar with the country. However, she and Francis had also brought 1 to 2 weapons with them across the border. So it's unclear why Sharon required a third gun. On the night of September 18, 1964, the mother of 3 left the hotel alone. While out, she encountered Francisco Ordóñez, a Mexican-born U.S. citizen, at a bar. She went back to his hotel with him later, telling the police that he had wanted to show her some photographs he had taken. However, in the hotel room, Sharon claimed Francisco made sexual advances towards her, and so she fired her gun at him in self-defense. She stated that she simply wanted to scare him off. Instead, she shot him in the chest, killing him immediately. The sound of the gunfire drew the attention of a hotel employee who entered the room and narrowly avoided being killed by Sharon too. The employee was shot in the shoulder and he promptly fled the scene, closing the door behind him, locking Sharon in the room until authorities arrived. The police did not believe Sharon's version of events. They suspected that she had attempted to rob Francisco and had shot him when he didn't comply. She was quickly arrested for homicide and assault with a deadly weapon. The mother of 3 maintained that she didn't want to hurt anybody but had to defend herself. The police discovered the gun and ammo in her handbag and further guns and ammo in the hotel room she was sharing with Francis. Francis was also arrested. His crimes included entering the country illegally and carrying an unlicensed firearm. One of the weapons retrieved from the hotel was found to be the same one which had killed Patricia Jones. But because Sharon had been acquitted, she could not be retried for this crime. Both Francis and Sharon were tried in the summer of 1965. Francis was cleared and deported back to the U.S. while Sharon was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison. She attempted to appeal her conviction, but was given a further 3 years behind bars as the court didn't believe that she'd been given a long enough sentence. In jail, she was nicknamed the Gunfighter, a name which was soon after adopted by the media. On December 7, 1969, 4 years after her conviction, Sharon was found to be not present for the 5 p.m. roll call in prison. However, her absence was not noted until a few hours later. It wasn't until 2 a.m. that her disappearance and presumed escape were reported to the Mexico City police. A large-scale manhunt ensued in the days following Sharon's vanishing act. The police suspected that she may have been going to visit a former inmate whom she'd grown close with, but they also notified the U.S. authorities, including the FBI, in case she attempted to make her way back home. Authorities initially believed that the prison guards had been bribed to look the other way as Sharon made her escape from prison. An atypical blackout had occurred around the time she vanished and a door had been left unsecured when it should have been locked. Additionally, there were fewer guards on duty at the time. Theories began circulating about what may have happened to the mother of 3. Some suggested that her mother had helped her escape. Others that she had a boyfriend who was in the police force and he had been responsible for helping her flee. In the years since, it has been suggested that she disguised herself as a man to leave the prison and the country, while a 2002 article from the Southeast Missourian suggests that Francisco's family had helped her escape so they could kill her. The search for Sharon lasted until December 18th. Investigators suspected that she had traveled to Guatemala, though it remains unclear how they came to this conclusion. Sharon had become fluent in Spanish during her time in prison, and authorities believed this skill would help her blend in and travel to areas where Spanish was the predominant language. By December of 1969, investigators announced that they had exhausted all leads in the case. After Sharon failed to appear for her 4th trial in October 1964, a warrant for her arrest was issued. As of 2010, Sharon Kinney's case remained unsolved and was considered the oldest outstanding murder warrant in the Kansas City area. Her fate is still unknown. Sharon is described as a white woman with gray eyes. At the time of her disappearance, she weighed 125 pounds and had blonde hair. She is 5 feet 7 inches tall and has a skin pigmentation disorder, with a red port wine scar on the left side of her face. If she is still alive, Sharon would be 83 years old. Moving on to the next case. Inger Maria Hauser, Northern Ireland, home to over 1.8 million residents, is rich in history, culture, and stunning architecture. Its capital, Belfast, is one of the most visited cities in the United Kingdom. However, due to its turbulent past, particularly during the Troubles, a conflict that ravaged the country from the 1960s to the 1990s. Northern Ireland has many strange and unresolved cases. One such mystery involves Inger Maria Hauser. On March 31, 1988, 18-year-old Inger Maria Hauser arrived in London for the first time in her life. Born and raised in Munich, West Germany, Inger had decided to buy an Interrail ticket and spend her spring and summer exploring the UK and Ireland. The Interrailing ticket gave her unlimited travel around European countries for a length of time and was cheaper than buying individual tickets every time she wanted to travel. From Munich, Inga went to Holland, and from there, she got a boat to Harwich on the east coast of England before finally arriving in London. As she made her way up to Scotland, she visited Oxford, Bath, Liverpool, and Preston. Inga regularly called home and wrote her family postcards as she discussed her travels. In one note, she wrote, "You probably could not imagine how much I like England. You don't need to worry about me, for the people here are so lovable and ready to help." Inga arrived in Inverness and sent a postcard to her parents, noting that she was short on money. Around this time, she cashed an £8.20 worth of her traveler's checks and took her last photograph, an image of Greg Street Bridge over the Riverness. From here, Inga made her way to the town of Strandra, where she boarded the Galloway Princess Ferry at 7 p.m. on April 6. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video, which would take her across the ocean to Northern Ireland. In her final journal entry, the 18-year-old wrote, "Went from Glasgow to Ayr and from there to Strandra to get over to Ireland. Saw the sea, beautiful and mysterious. Wonder where I stay tonight. Need more money." Inger was last seen wearing baseball boots, a long flowing skirt which was possibly multicolored, and a jacket which was possibly denim with a large blue rucksack. On top of the bag was a USAF badge. Several witnesses saw Inga after she boarded the ferry. The same witness saw her twice. Once entering the boat as a foot passenger alone with her rucksack and once in the lounge without her back. A second witness saw the 18-year-old alone on the deck again without her back. This was the last confirmed sighting of Inga, and it is unknown where her bag was at this time. Authorities have noted that they are interested in finding out if the bag was with somebody else or if Inger simply left it unattended. At 9:30 p.m., the ferry arrived in Larne, Northern Ireland. Ordinarily, most foot passengers would leave the vessel and get the train to Belfast from the nearby train station. However, Inger was not seen getting on the train. Aslan is a small port town on Ireland's coast. Its accommodation options in 1988 were limited, making it an odd choice of town for a traveler to stay in, and there appears to have been no record of her doing so. If Inga didn't walk to Larne or get the train to Belfast, and nor was she seen leaving the ferry on foot, it suggests the possibility that she may have exited the vessel while in a vehicle. Over 100 vehicles had been aboard the ship and 422 passengers were present at the time. While it is unclear where exactly Inga went after leaving the ferry, what is known is that she was never seen alive again. 2 weeks later, on April 20th, a sheep farmer discovered Inger's half-naked body in a clearing in a remote area of Ballypatrick Forest just outside Ballicksall, County Antrim, about a mile from the nearest public road. Inger had sustained a serious injury to her head and a broken neck and had been sexually assaulted before death. Her belongings had been dumped alongside her body, including her passport, journal, and camera. She was 40 miles north of Larne. Little is documented about the investigation into Inger's case, at least online. A retired detective superintendent named Alan Bailey noted that her body hadn't been concealed and her identity hadn't been disguised. It appeared that the perpetrator had been rather bold, perhaps even confident. It's also been theorized that the culprit was a local who knew the area well, given how isolated the forest was. The spot where Inger's body had been dumped required one to walk down multiple dirt paths to reach it. It was initially believed that Inga had been elsewhere for 2 weeks before her body was left in the forest, possibly held against her, while during that time, as investigators couldn't find any damage from wildlife to her body. However, later, more advanced forensic techniques revealed that she had been in the forest for 2 weeks, meaning She'd been murdered just hours after arriving in Ireland. As there was no trace evidence at the scene, it was suspected that she'd been assaulted and slain elsewhere, and that the forest clearing was only the dumping site. One early theory was that Inga had met a soldier while on board the ferry. This notion came about as investigators believed that it was likely someone with military training who had broken the 18-year-old's neck. At this time, thousands of British troops were in Northern Ireland, many of whom likely would have trained in Germany. It was thought that Inger hit it off with one of these men and things had gone south. However, there was never any evidence that proved this theory. Another theory that was considered in 1996 was that Inger's murder was connected to that of a French woman named Céline Fagard, a hitchhiker who went missing in 1995 during a trip to the UK. She had accepted a lift from a lorry driver named Stuart William Morgan who raped, strangled, and bludgeoned her. He kept her body in his truck for 10 days before dumping it and was later convicted of the crime. However, the notion that the two cases are connected has been dismissed in more recent years. Today, it is generally theorized that Inga met someone on the boat who offered her a lift and somewhere to stay. As she was short on cash, she accepted their offer. Reddit users have wondered if it was an older man or even a couple, which perhaps reassured her that she would be safe. Inga's case is still unsolved but not forgotten. A cold case unit analyzed the DNA found on the young woman's body and swabbed 2,000 men looking for a potential match but found none. In 2018, it was reported that law enforcement believed there were a number of people involved in the crime, and they focused specifically on the village of Lafayette, not far from the forest. In 1988, it was revealed that a local IRA unit had identified a man with scratches on his face near the time of the crime but never informed law enforcement about the suspect. In 2018, a 59-year-old man was arrested, questioned, and later released in connection with the crime, along with a second man. A case was built against both individuals and sent to the Public Prosecution Service. However, in 2020, it was announced that neither man would be charged due to insufficient evidence, and their DNA did not match the samples found on Inger's body. Sadly, Inger's father passed away in 2006, and her mother in 2019. She is survived by her sister and nephew, who, as of April 2021, are seeking a new inquest into her death. Lisa Ziegert. When 24-year-old Lisa Ziegert, who worked the night shift, went missing, both her family and the police feared the worst after traces of blood and signs of a struggle were found at her workplace. Despite an extensive search over the following days, their worst fears were confirmed when her body was discovered 5 kilometers from her workplace. For decades, efforts to apprehend her killer were unsuccessful. Finally, after 25 years, her loved ones have received answers about what happened to Lisa Ziegert. This case takes us to Agawam, Massachusetts, a small town near the western Connecticut border. Agawam is best known for the Six Flags amusement park, the largest of its kind in New England. The park features a wave pool, numerous water slides, and 8 thrilling roller coasters. Agawam also boasts Robinson State Park, a popular day-use park offering biking trails, fishing ponds, walking paths, kayaking, and cross-country skiing. The city's economy is driven by industries like construction, manufacturing, and retail, and its residents appreciate the convenience of living in Agawam. Most residents commute 25 minutes or less to work, making it an attractive place to live. Agawam is home to 3 elementary schools, including Agawam High School, which honors one of the town's most beloved teachers with a memorial, Lisa Ziegert, whose untimely death changed the city of Agawam forever. Lisa Marie Ziegert was born on March 24, 1968 in Holyoke, Massachusetts to George and Diane Ziegert. Lisa grew up in a loving, tight-knit family. She had 3 other siblings named Sharon, David, and Lynn. Lisa and her family were residents of Agawam. Lisa developed a deep passion for music while growing up, learning to play several instruments. She even joined school musical groups during her youth. After high school, Lisa attended Westfield State University, where she pursued a degree in education and graduated in 1990. Lisa worked as an intern and took on multiple shifts as a counselor at a children's camp, enjoying every opportunity to teach. Teaching was a profession she truly loved. She took her profession seriously and was active at it in every way. She had also taught Sunday school at her church. After her internship was over, at the age of 24, Lisa accepted a position as a teacher's assistant at Agawam High School, where she had previously attended as a teenager. There, she worked primarily with a group of kids that had special needs. Lisa had a greater understanding of her students than any other instructor. She was also very professional and worked hard to ensure that every one of her students received the best education possible. Lisa was a very special person. With the kids, she always had a special rapport. They knew that she really liked them and that she treated them like people, Lisa's mom said. In the evenings, after the shift at school was over, Lisa also had a part-time job at the neighborhood Brittany card and gift shop. One fateful Wednesday afternoon on September 15, 1992, was typical for Lisa Ziegler. She had concluded her shift at the school. She left the school building around 4:30 p.m. and drove directly to the card and gift store, where she worked weekdays from 5 to 9 p.m. Her sister, Lynn, briefly dropped by around 5:30 p.m. to keep her company, because Lisa would always complain to her family about how bored, lonely, and scared she feels while at the shop at night. According to Lynn, during her visit to the store, there was no sign of Lisa being in a bad mood. She said her sister was cheerful the whole time that evening, and nothing seemed off. It was easy talk. It was sister talk. It was a little after 6 p.m. when I left. And then I went home and she was fine. You know, she was fine when I left, Lynn said. By 8:45 a.m. the next morning, Sophia Maynard arrived at the card and gift store, just as she did every day, to open up. She was supposed to start work at 9 o'clock. However, she was shocked to see Lisa's car in the parking lot. As Lisa typically worked at the school in the mornings and wasn't expected to be in the store while classes were in session, Sophia noticed that a light was on inside the store and the doors open sign was visible. At that point, Sophia thought that Lisa might have missed the school morning shift because of the incoming Easter celebration. She and Lisa intended to stuff some balloons for sale during that holiday. When Sophia entered the store, she called Lisa's name multiple times, but she got no answer. I called her name a couple of times and I figured she'd just pop her head out. She didn't. I came behind the counter. All of her things were there. Her drawings, her pocketbook, her car keys. And then, I just kind of freaked out, Sophia said. Everything looked strange to Sophia. She felt something was not right. She immediately dashed out the store and ran across the street to a restaurant there and then asked them to call the police. As soon as the police got there, they started inspecting the store. The front of the building appeared to be normal, but the back had a creepy opening. Approaching the storeroom at the back, officers discovered numerous shattered bags that had blood stains on them. They also found several cards scattered across the floor, covered in blood, which indicated a struggle between Lisa Ziegert and her attacker. Additionally, there were small dirt traces near the door, which investigators believed could have been from a shoe. Despite these clues, the investigators were unable to find any useful leads within the store. That morning, Lisa failed to show up at school, which was unusual for her. The principal called her mother to check if everything was okay with her, but Diane Ziegert had no idea where her daughter was. Her news of disappearance traveled the town of Agawam, and within hours, all of her friends, family, and acquaintances began to do all they can to bring Lisa back home. The police initial strategy to the case was to develop a robbery theory. But that theory was quickly abandoned when they discovered that the perpetrator had not accessed Lisa's wallet or cash register. The goods in the store were also not missing. The second approach the detectives took in the case was to retrace the timeline of what happened the previous evening. Investigators learned that Lisa's sister had left the shop around 6 p.m. They also spoke with store owners and neighbors near the card and gift shop. It was revealed that Lisa had a conversation with the owner of the carpet shop next door around 7:20 p.m. During their discussion, they talked about an ongoing issue with their local parking lot, which was being used by patrons of the nearby bowling alley. The shop owner informed Lisa that he wouldn't risk publicly criticizing the drivers who had parked in front of their stores. He claimed that many of them were crazy and dangerous. After about 15 minutes of conversation with Lisa, he left to go home. Police went through the cash register and discovered that the most recent time money had been deposited was 8:20 p.m. Investigators also located a woman who entered the store at about 9 p.m. She said the store's door was open but nobody came out to attend to her, so she left. Before taking her leave, she claimed to have heard noises coming from the back room. She said it was a banging noise, but she didn't think much of it and decided to leave. The police were able to determine the general time frame of Lisa's disappearance. She finished attending to her last customer at 8:20 p.m. and by 9 o'clock, something had happened to her. The detectives were then left with the questions of what had happened to Lisa Ziegert within those 40 minutes. On the day Lisa was discovered missing, the local police together with the FBI and the Massachusetts State Police carried out a massive search for her. The search party on foot explored the vicinity of the store while the helicopter searched farther off areas. Additionally, police dogs were brought to the store area in an effort to follow Lisa's track. Sadly, none of these produced any favorable outcomes. On April 17, 1992, the head of the local police department announced that the case had been reclassified from a missing person case to a kidnapping case. This was done because investigators were confident that Lisa had not left the store of her own free will. 2 days after she vanished, the police were already looking into a kidnapping case. On Easter Sunday, April 19th, all the nearby churches prayed for Lisa Ziegert to be found alive and unharmed. Even though it was Easter, there was no sense of celebration. Around 2 p.m. that same day, a call was made to the police. On the outskirts of the town, close to Route 75, a man was walking his dog. He spotted a woman's body while walking through the wooded area. He immediately alerted the police afterwards. When police arrived, they identified the victim as Lisa Ziegert. They discovered multiple stab wounds on her neck and legs, which had been inflicted by a sharp object. Medical professionals later determined that Lisa had also been sexually assaulted. Investigators concluded that her body had been dumped 5 kilometers away from the store, suggesting that the perpetrator had likely transported her there in a vehicle. To preserve any potential evidence, detectives quickly cordoned off the area and proceeded in a single line to secure the site. At the time, it was raining and the muddy road was covered in tire tracks. Sadly, the cops were unable to locate the murder weapon or any other concrete proof. The sad news that Lisa Ziegert had been brutally murdered by an unidentified killer immediately went around the city of Agawam. The church where she taught Sunday school on Sundays, in her honor, organized a farewell service. Around 1,000 people attended the service. People said good things about her. Lisa was loved, and the news of her premature demise made residents of the small community of Agawam, who were used to living in peace and safety, experience a mood that was almost panic. Many store owners canceled single shifts and employees escorted one another to their cars at night. Within a matter of days, the self-defense instructors had a lot of students coming in for classes. Also, roughly 300 women filed for a license to possess a gun. The entire community was terrified that an unidentified criminal would attack one of them again. Amidst all these, the FBI and the police were fervently working on the case nonstop. It soon became public knowledge that they had obtained a DNA sample from the crime scene. The DNA sample might have belonged to the murderer. The investigators at some point brought Lisa's boyfriend in for questioning since they suspected him. He, however, had an alibi and the DNA sample from the crime scene did not match his DNA. Additionally, DNA testing was done on Lisa's friends, coworkers, and relatives, and again, no matches were found. Numerous tips were sent to the police by locals. On the night of Lisa's murder, there were several reports of a strange car. Others claimed to know the offender's identity, but detectives weeded out all of these leads since they were dead ends. The police concluded that a van or a large SUV had left the tire tracks on the road close to where the body was discovered. Despite extensive questioning of drivers with similar vehicles, detectives made little progress in identifying the offender. However, they eventually located a potential witness who might have seen a vehicle of interest that night. Around 9:15 p.m., a worker from a nearby store was heading home when she stopped at a traffic light. She noticed a large SUV pulling off the road and heading toward the area where Lisa's body was later found. Due to the darkness, the woman could not provide specific details about the vehicle but recalled seeing what appeared to be a man and a woman inside. She also mentioned the peculiar fact that the woman's head was oddly jerking, as if she were dozing off or unconscious when the car pulled into the gravel road. Unfortunately, the information did not help in identifying the suspect. Since then, all leads have been exhausted. Police kept working on the case. But as each month went by, the likelihood of cracking this mysterious case diminished before Lisa's family and friends were given another opportunity to learn the truth. An additional year and a half had gone. National television aired an episode about the case in October 1993. The well-liked program featured unresolved case stories that received a ton of attention. This occasionally brought fresh witnesses to the police attention, giving the case new life. Lisa's case was not different. The police received 700 calls from callers with some kind of information within an hour of the broadcast. Most of these leads, as usual, went nowhere, though all of them were looked into by the police. The cops claimed to have found a few worthwhile leads, but they did not say which one. Sadly, it also had little effect. The likelihood of cracking the case significantly decreased with time. The family of Lisa went to tremendous lengths to make sure her legacy was preserved and not forgotten. Despite the early end to Lisa's teaching career, her family had a significant impact on the Agawam's educational system. 3 years after Lisa's murder, in 1995, her parents donated $11,000 specifically to the school's science department, where Lisa worked. These donations were used to support genetics classes and to purchase equipments. Additionally, her parents established a fund for special needs students, which gave them around $35,000 in scholarships. 2002 made it 10 years since Lisa was killed. Still, her mother, D.Z. Gert, held out hope that the case will eventually be solved. She made considerable efforts to preserve her daughter's memories. She partook in every interview and responded to every questions from the media. Each year, she assembled a sizable crowd to light candles in Lisa's memory. During this time, investigators continued their relentless work on Lisa Ziegert's case. The only significant evidence they had was a DNA sample obtained from the alleged murderer. They tirelessly cross-referenced the sample with databases of known criminals, hoping the real suspect would eventually be identified. However, months turned into years, and the killer remained elusive. After 24 long years, on September 24, 2016, investigators decided to take a new approach to solving the case. They then opted for DNA phenotyping. The basic idea behind it is that specialists can determine a person's supposed portrait and physical characteristics from the data contained in their DNA. For example, with the use of DNA, experts can determine a person's gender, their approximate age, eye color, and hair color. Although the portrait created using this data may not always be correct, but occasionally, the coincidence of the portrait matching the face of the real suspect is remarkable. Based on the DNA sample of Lisa's murderer, investigators were able to produce 2 portraits of the culprit, one at age 25 and the other at age 50. After the photos were released to the public, more than 170 calls were made to the police department. People who made these calls claimed to have seen a similar man. However, the majority of these leads were fruitless. On September 18, 2017, just a year later, police made an unexpected prominent announcement. The offender had been taken into custody. He was identified as Gary Shera, a 49-year-old man. The news of his arrest immediately spread like wildfire throughout the media. Rarely do the police catch the murderer 25 years after the crime was committed. As a result, such stories immediately garner a lot of public interest. The moment Gary Shera was taken into custody, the detectives made public how they had located him. It was discovered that Gary was listed as a suspect in 1993, the year after Lisa was killed. Do you remember that federal television program that resulted in thousands of phone calls with leads for the police? Well, it happened that a Seattle lawyer was one of those callers. At the time, he informed the police that his client might know something about Lisa's death. His client was a woman who was divorcing her spouse at the time. The couple lived in Long Meadow, a town near Agawam. The woman reported that her husband had been unusually fixated on Lisa Ziegert's case during the time it was being broadcast. She mentioned that whenever Lisa's murder was mentioned on TV, her husband would enter the room, fixate on the screen, and stare vacantly, seemingly unaware of anything else happening around him. This behavior raised suspicions, and the husband in question was Gary Scara. At the time of Lisa's murder, he was 24 years old and was married with a 1-year-old son. Gary Scara and his wife were always arguing and getting into fights, and soon after the birth of their son, they had already started their divorce process. In 1993, according to the police statement, investigators had already developed the notion that Gary was involved in Lisa's murder, but they couldn't find any proof to back it up. Also, his ex-wife, who provided the information, made the police doubt her testimony. And this is because she had a long history of alcohol abuse in addition to a long list of mental illnesses. Additionally, Gary was granted legal custody of their son after the divorce, but his wife secretly transferred the boy to a different state. It's also crucial to note that this wasn't the first time some wives contacted the police to report that their husbands might have been responsible for Lisa Ziegert's death. There were a lot of calls like that, and the police assumed Gary Scara's case was one of them. Despite all these, at a point, Gary was questioned in an interview, but he claimed not to be involved in Lisa's murder and declined to provide a sample of his DNA. With no legal means to force Gary Scara to provide a DNA sample, the police were left with no choice but to focus on him as a suspect. They compiled a list of all the men who had been questioned about the crime but had refused to provide their DNA. Gary Scara's name appeared on this list, and he was repeatedly called in for questioning. In 2008, during his third interview, Scara displayed unusual behavior, trying to avoid touching anything in the room, including the table in front of him. Even when offered a bottle of water, he refused to touch it. He gave off the impression that his only thought was how to prevent the police from getting a sample of his DNA. In 2017, investigators compiled a list of 11 suspects, including Gary Scara. Each of them had declined to willingly provide a DNA sample after being interviewed at various points throughout the investigation. In reality, there were a lot more suspects on that list, but due to DNA phenotyping, detectives were able to exclude the wrong men. These men didn't fit some of the traits that experts got from the DNA sample of Lisa's killer. In August of 2017, having been refused many times by the suspects on the list to provide their DNA, investigators had no other choice but to compile all available evidence and go to court. They asked the court for an order requiring all the 11 members on the compiled list of suspects to submit their DNA samples, to which the court granted their request. The cops visited Gary's apartment on Lathrop Street at Westfield Spring on September 13, 2017 to inform him of this order. But Gary wasn't at home. His roommate with whom they shared the apartment answered the door. The cops gave him their contact address. They also requested that he promptly pass the information to Gary Scara. The following day, an unexpected event took place. Gary Scara's then-girlfriend called the cops and told them that Gary had left 3 letters in her house. To the investigators' surprise, when they opened the letters, Gary Scara had written in details his confession, a last will and testament, and a brief letter of apology to the Ziegert family. I've never really been or even felt normal. From a very young age, I was fascinated by abduction and bondage. I could never keep it too far from my mind for long. On that fateful day, I let myself do something terrible, Gary Scara wrote. In his letter, Gary Scara confessed that although he had no intention of killing Lisa, the situation had spiraled out of control. He admitted to having had several opportunities to turn himself in but confessed to being too much of a coward to do so. Scara revealed that he had lived with years of self-hatred. In the letter's conclusion, he made it clear that he intended to take his own life. Upon reading this, the police immediately began searching for Gary Scara, and soon, his car was found in the parking lot of a hospital in Stafford Springs. Another suicide note was placed on the windshield. It was soon discovered that Gary had taken some harmful drugs to kill himself, but he immediately got into his car and drove to the closest hospital, where the drugs were flushed out of his body system. After the doctors were done tending to him, Gary Scara was arrested and taken into custody. A search warrant for both his apartment and that of his girlfriend's was simultaneously issued by a judge. The police discovered numerous items that contained his DNA there. When these items were tested for a DNA sample, It was not surprising that Gary Shara was Lisa Ziegert's killer because the DNA found on the items in his home 100% matched the DNA sample found on Lisa Ziegert's body. Aside from this, investigators also had several other potentially important leads. Joyce McDonald Shara, Gary's wife, who had first raised concerns about him in 1993, had sadly passed away in 2014. Investigators uncovered disturbing documents written by Gary Shara's wife's attorney, which provided alarming details. One day, Gary had told his wife bluntly that he couldn't engage in intimacy unless he was holding a knife. The day after Lisa's murder, the woman called her sister, revealing that Gary had returned home late that night with scratches all over his body and appeared visibly disturbed. Furthermore, Gary gave his wife a music box claiming he had bought it from the same gift and card store where Lisa worked. These details added to the mounting suspicion surrounding Gary Shara. But according to Gary, it was an older woman who actually sold it to him. The issue is that there had never before been such an employee at the store. It is unclear why the police was not informed about all of these details in 1993. And it is impossible to find out now because the woman who had the information has died. Gary Shara kept declaring his innocence while in custody and refused to admit to his wrongdoings. He most likely acted out of pure fear. But with that much evidence against him, there was no way out for him to get away with his crimes. He only succeeded in delaying his sentence, and that was all. The trial wasn't scheduled to start for another 2 years. But Gary, who had been in prison the entire time, decided to confess to his crime. According to Massachusetts law, a defendant facing a first-degree murder charge faces life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lisa Ziegert's family and friends were present in the courtroom, including her mother, Dee Ziegert, who had spent 25 years hoping for answers about her daughter's murder. She expressed her gratitude to everyone involved in the investigation, as well as to the compassionate citizens who had supported her family throughout the years. While Lisa had finally received the justice she deserved, Dee acknowledged that emotional closure would never truly be attained. Ziegert's case being solved after 25 years is both a bittersweet and significant moment. It underscores the resilience of her family, especially her parents, who never gave up seeking justice for their daughter despite the long wait. While it brings a sense of closure and accountability with Gary Shara's life sentence, it's impossible to fully erase the pain and loss that Lisa's family and loved ones continue to carry. The case also highlights the importance of persistence in investigations and how advancements in DNA technology can ultimately bring justice, even when it seems elusive. It's a reminder of the long-lasting impact of such tragedies on families and communities, and a relentless pursuit of truth, no matter how much time has passed. Moving on to the next case. Jennifer Watkins. On November 6, 1999, Jennifer Watkins failed to return home after her shift at Memorial Hospital, prompting her husband, Michael Watkins, to contact the Fountain Police Department and report her missing. That same day, Irene Skinner, Jennifer's mother, who cared for her grandchildren, reached out to the Colorado Springs Police Department after her daughter did not show up to pick them up. A missing person report was quickly initiated by the Colorado Springs Police Department. In the early stages of the investigation, detectives and patrol officers conducted several interviews with Jennifer's family members and co-workers. With Michael Watkins' assistance, they were able to locate Jennifer's car in an employee parking area near Printers Parkway and East Ikes Peak Avenue. The car was impounded, but no evidence or clues linking Jennifer Watkins' disappearance were found during the subsequent search. Investigators continued their efforts, conducting interviews with people at the Memorial Hospital where she worked. On November 8, 1999, while at the hospital, detectives received a call around 10 a.m. reporting the discovery of a body behind a stairwell in a section of the hospital still under construction. 2 Dover elevator service workers, who had entered the stairwell on the 8th level to inspect and repair an elevator shaft, were struck by a strong, unpleasant odor as they approached the area. When the elevator staff peered under the stairwell, they noticed what appeared to be the outline of a body bound with duct tape and covered in plastic. On request, the scene was immediately visited by investigators from the Colorado Springs Police Department Homicide Unit, Metro Crime Lab, and the El Paso County Coroner's Office. After the investigators removed the plastic, they found a deceased white female adult with brown hair. The victim was dressed in a purple blouse, black slacks, and a teal uniform smock. Her clothing was laid out in a way that suggested a sexual assault had taken place. Detectives questioned a number of workers and contractors at Memorial Hospital throughout the course of the investigation. No suspect was found despite looking into more potential suspect leads. The deceased adult female's autopsy was soon completed by the El Paso County Coroner's Office, and she turned out to be 23 years old Jennifer Watkins, who suddenly went missing a few days back. According to David Bowerman, the coroner for El Paso at the time, Jennifer had died of blunt force trauma to the head. Her death was determined to be a homicide. The question of who killed Jennifer Watkins bugged the police and her family for years. Jennifer Lee Watkins was born on November 24, 1975 to William and Irene Skinner in Methuen, Massachusetts. She was the second of 4 children, and Joseph, her youngest brother, held a special place in her heart. Jennifer obtained her high school diploma from Hanover, Colorado High School. She enjoyed socializing with friends and caring for her pets. Jennifer loved playing volleyball and wished to help people. Her love for music made her join the school band as a clarinetist. Jennifer Watkins desired a career as a nurse. She and her husband, Michael Watkins, married on April 8, 1995. And roughly 3 years later, Michael was hired as a maintenance worker at the Memorial Hospital in Colorado Springs. Not long after, Jennifer was also hired there as a dietitian. The investigators worked tirelessly to bring justice to Jennifer's family. As part of the crime scene processing, a close inspection of the plastic used to wrap Jennifer Watkins' body turned up some hairs, fibers, and a yellow-whitish stain that was eventually identified as cement. At the autopsy, further biological evidence was also gathered. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation received a number of pieces of evidence for analysis. In addition to the victim's DNA profile, 2 other DNA profiles were created from the evidence items submitted for processing. The plastic wrap, the victim's pants, and semen samples taken at the autopsy were used to create these profiles. Although the semen found in Jennifer Watkins' pants and in the plastic wrap matched each other, they did not match the sample taken during the autopsy. A number of potential suspects had their biological samples taken, and all of them had been exonerated because their DNA did not match the 2 unidentified DNA samples. Although there were security cameras installed all over the hospital facility, the pictures were too blurry to be of much help. Police originally concentrated on those with access to the crime site, but there were no leads. They then shifted concentration on Michael Watkins, who worked night shift in the hospital's housekeeping division. Irene Skinner, Jennifer Watkins' mother, had her doubts about Michael. According to Irene, her daughter's life took a different turn after she moved in with her husband, Michael Watkins, whom she had attended grade school with. Irene Skinner reported that Michael Watkins struggled with drug use, and more often than not, Jennifer required multiple visits to the emergency as a result of domestic abuse. Also, in addition to his volatile personality and tumultuous relationship with Jennifer, Michael Watkins had wrought ends with the law in the past, which involved criminal mischief and a Peloton incident. He was, however, interrogated multiple times as the investigation progressed, and he complied fully with all the proceedings. Michael admitted he had an affair with Jennifer since one of the DNA found on Jennifer Watkins' body came from him. He, however, denied killing her. After obtaining a warrant, they searched Michael Watkins' home and discovered a pair of pants that seemed to be covered in blood. An analysis of the object revealed that it was blood, but it was Michael's blood. The 2 DNA samples that were taken from the crime scene didn't provide any answers. Even if the one from Jennifer's body matched Michael's DNA, it didn't raise a red flag because Michael was married to Jennifer. The other DNA sample from the plastic was unknown. The police asked Michael Watkins to take a polygraph test, to which he consented and passed. Even though Michael was still a suspect, the detectives looked at other possibilities. They focused on a male hospital employee who mysteriously left town without warning or collecting his final salary immediately after the murder of Jennifer. During investigation, detectives soon discovered that the man was on probation for a murder in Louisiana, which he claimed was self-defense. When authorities located him, He rejected all accusations of involvement in Jennifer Watkins' murder and consented to provide a DNA sample. His DNA, however, didn't match the DNA discovered at the crime site where Jennifer was killed. Following a thorough investigation, no suspect was found, and the case eventually became cold. Numerous investigators have been trying to identify a suspect in Jennifer Watkins for the past 21 years without success. Jennifer's case remained unresolved for a while. Over the years, technological advancements and familial DNA analysis occurred. Between 2017 and 2018, cold case investigators with the help of Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based DNA technology business, used DNA phenotyping to determine the physical characteristics and ancestry of the unidentified DNA evidence at the crime scene. The suspect traits was predicted using the DNA evidence found in Jennifer Watkins. Parabon made an individual prediction of the suspect's ancestry, eye color, hair color, skin tone, freckling, and face shape. A snapshot composite was created by combining these physical characteristics to show what the suspect would have looked like at age 25. And with an average body mass index of 22. Due to the fact that age and body mass index cannot be established from DNA, these default values were utilized. In an effort to generate leads, these photos were subsequently released to the public. The findings showed that the murderer had fair skin, blue or green eyes, blonde or brown hair, and was around 25 years old when the crime occurred. However, investigators were able to focus on a person who police had actually interrogated in 1999 after using genetic genealogy to narrow down the suspect. The killer was Ricky Sievert. According to a check of the original case report, Ricky Sievert, who was 29 at the time of the murder, was questioned by investigators on November 19, 1999 as a part of the initial homicide investigation. He was employed by Memorial Hospital and was a member of the maintenance team. He started working there in April 1998. According to Ricky Sievert's work schedule that he provided during his interview, on November 5, 1999, the day Jennifer Watkins was last seen, he would have been working a swing shift. Additionally, he denied ever having met Jennifer Watkins when asked. Finally, the culprit has been identified, but sadly, further investigation revealed that on November 2, 2001, 2 years after Jennifer Watkins' murder, Ricky Sievert was killed in a car accident on Highway 94, just east of Colorado Springs. The investigators, however, obtained DNA samples from the suspect's living relatives. According to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the proportion of the population that may be excluded as a contributor to the DNA gathered in this case is 99.99994%. It means Ricky Sievert cannot be excluded. The 4th Judicial District Attorney's Office received the Jennifer Watkins case on October 1, 2020 for examination. The District Attorney's Office is certain that Ricky Sievert killed Jennifer Watkins. The investigation into the murder of Jennifer Watkins will be closed as exceptionally clear due to the death of the offender, Ricky Sievert, who passed away in a car accident in 2001. After all these years, we are grateful to finally provide Jennifer Watkins' family with the answers they deserve. Regardless of the time that has passed, we remain committed to serving this community. I am proud of the cold case detectives who, over the past 21 years, have never stopped working. For Ms. Watkins, they never lost sight of what was most important, finding the truth for the Watkins family. We also extend our gratitude to our partners who assisted in this case. We would not have been able to solve this case without your time, skill, and dedication, said Colorado Springs Police Department Chief Vince Nisk. Cheyenne Cluss, a 22-year-old from Chicago, was known for her vibrant and outgoing personality. Her social media was filled with selfies and memes that showcased her fun-loving spirit. However, her life took a difficult turn in January 2016, when her mother, with whom she was very close, passed away. To make matters worse, she also lost her beloved dog shortly after. These devastating losses left Cheyenne struggling emotionally during an incredibly tough time. On September 4, 2016, she posted on her Facebook, "Unfortunately, just lost another part of our family. My puppy Micah. I had the opportunity to have you as my best friend for 11 years of my life. Go get mom and keep her company up there. I love you. Cheyenne's emotional struggles were evident through her Facebook posts, where her depression and suffering became more apparent. During this time, she started spending time with individuals who weren't the best influence on her. One such person was 31-year-old Gabe Sotikase. Their relationship took a turn when both Cheyenne and Gabe were arrested. Cheyenne faced charges for obstructing identification and illegal transport of alcohol, while Gabe was charged with possession of a controlled substance. On the night of November 27, 2017, Cheyenne left her home with her laptop and a few pieces of clothing. She then went to the house of 38-year-old Brian Biddle. While there, Brian posted photos of Cheyenne on her Facebook. The two of them spent most of their time partying and drinking together. Early morning on November 29, 2017, a friend of Cheyenne named Chad Shanapai received a few texts and calls from Cheyenne. He woke up 20 minutes after her last message. Chad saw that Cheyenne desperately wanted a lift from him, and that it seemed like she wanted to get out of Brian's house. Chad tried calling her, but there was no answer. He then called Brian, who told him that he slept for 18 hours after all the drinking, and when he woke up, Cheyenne was gone. The day of when she actually was reported missing does not seem to be known. Some sources stated that it was on December 1, 2017, while others say it is December 11th or December 12th. It is known that Cheyenne's father was the one that reported her missing. On December 11th, 2017, a 911 call was made from Cheyenne's phone. The person who made the call immediately hung up. It is not known if it was Cheyenne who made the phone call or someone else using her phone. Police were able to trace the call to Mallard Lake Forest Preserve, about 20 miles from Brian's house. The police searched the area extensively. They found a couple of items, but nothing that could be linked to Cheyenne's disappearance at all. The police stated that Brian Biddle is not a suspect and that he has been cooperating with them. He let them search his home, phone, computer, and other personal devices. Many people believe that Brian is involved. He is a known drug addict. After Cheyenne disappeared, he was arrested for having a firearm and narcotics. He is also the last person to have seen her. There are also people who think that their friend, Chad Chennai, might be involved in her disappearance. It appeared like he was friend-zoned and cared more for Cheyenne than she did for him. In his interview with Crime Watch Daily, he made it clear how he disliked the fact that Cheyenne was with other men like Brian and Gabe. It should also be noted that on the day the 911 call was made from Cheyenne's phone, Chad put up this post on his Facebook account. Also on his Facebook, you'll see that pretty much all of his posts are about Cheyenne, even before she disappeared. Then, on January 16, 2023, Cheyenne's family posted on social media that her remains had been found. Cheyenne's sister, Mariah Close, posted this on Facebook. Dear friends and family, on behalf of the Close family, we would like to extend our appreciation to the DuPage and Cook County Sheriff's Departments, as well as other agencies involved in the search for Cheyenne. We have been looking for Cheyenne and information related to her disappearance since she went missing 5 years ago. While it was not the news we were hoping for, we have received confirmation from law enforcement that Cheyenne's remains have been found. As her immediate family, father, sisters, brothers, nephews are in mourning. We ask for privacy as we grieve the unbearable loss of a daughter, sister, aunt, and a wonderful human being. The Cook County Sheriff's Office did not disclose the specific details about where or how Cheyenne Cluss remains were found. However, they confirmed that they worked closely with the DuPage County Sheriff's Office and the FBI to identify Cheyenne's remains through dental records. In a statement, the Sheriff's Office expressed their commitment to continuing the investigation in collaboration with Chicago police, while offering condolences and noting the closure this brings to the Cluss family. Moving on to the next case. Patricia and Lloyd Dwayne Bogle on a chilly December evening in 1955, 16-year-old Patricia, a high school junior, attended her cousin's wedding. It was there that she first met 18-year-old Airman Lloyd Dwayne Bogle. The moment they locked eyes, the attraction was immediate and undeniable. Their connection was electric, something that went beyond physical attraction. It was as if they had known each other for much longer, an instant bond that felt deep and profound. Within a month of dating, Patricia and Lloyd were already discussing marriage. They seemed inseparable, spending countless hours together, going on dates, and sharing their dreams of a future. On the evening of January 2nd, 1956, nearly a month after they first met, the young couple went to Pete's Drive-In restaurant for a romantic dinner in Great Falls, Montana. Witnesses reported seeing them leave the drive-in around 9 p.m., heading west on Central Avenue toward a well-known lover's lane near Wadsworth Park. That would be the last time anyone saw them. Neither Patricia nor Dwayne returned home, leaving a mystery in their wake. At precisely 9 p.m., Patricia and Dwayne departed Pete's Drive-In, their final sighting. When Patricia did not arrive home that night, her family concluded she had run away with Dwayne. Familiarity struck her parents. Patricia's oldest sister had similarly eloped at her age. Patricia's parents initially assumed she had eloped with Dwayne. However, as they pondered the situation, doubts began to creep in. The question lingered in their minds. Why would she elope? Patricia was not the type of person to run away without telling anyone, and this only deepened their concern. She held an unwavering commitment to her studies, attending high school religiously. College dreams bloomed in her future. Moreover, she valued her curfew, never staying out late. This made her sudden absence even more confounding. And when they thought about Dwayne, he was more than just a passing acquaintance. Dwayne had been embraced as part of the family, and there was no apparent reason for them to elope. His stable position as a rising sergeant second class at Malmstrom Air Force Base, where he was assigned to the 29th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, further added to the mystery. His life appeared secure and promising, which made his sudden disappearance alongside Patricia even more perplexing. Together, the couple seemed to lack motives for running away. That same night, 2 women and 2 airmen crossed paths with a man sprawled between a car and a tree. Untroubled, they brushed it off, assuming the man was too drunk to drive and had collapsed beside his vehicle. A moment overlooked, a life ignored. The next morning, January 3rd, 1956, 3 young boys exploring the Great Falls area stumbled upon a grim sight. The remains of 18-year-old Lloyd Dwayne Bogle were discovered in a chilling scene. His body, twisted and partially concealed beneath a car, was found in the morning light. His wrists were bound with his own belt, and a fatal wound had pierced his skull. The car's ignition was still on, adding to the unsettling nature of the discovery. Headlights piercing the early morning darkness. A grim scene. Authorities, spurred by a coroner's examination, advised an autopsy. The chilling truth emerged. Dwayne had been shot, yet the bullet remained undiscovered. The search to find the missing bullet continued. It was a very important clue to catch the perpetrator. In a haunting revelation during the autopsy, it emerged that Dwayne was alive for several hours after being shot, adding layers to the tragedy. Patricia was nowhere to be found. The search for Patricia became paramount. A day passed, the January 5th, 1956. Patricia's remains were discovered in a rocky ravine, not too far from Dwayne's. Fully clothed, perched at the edge of a steep embankment off an isolated highway in northwest Montana, 8 miles from Dwayne. No signs of robbery or assault were noticed in the initial investigation. Puzzling scene. An expensive camera in Dwayne's car. A $5 bill in his wallet. Patricia was not indecently assaulted. Motives questioned, motives unclear. There were no apparent signs suggesting Patricia was forcefully subjected to any forms of inappropriate violation when her remains were initially examined. However, during her autopsy, it became apparent that she had likely faced a distressing ordeal by an animalistic abuser. The news reports on the incident merely hinted at this, perhaps due to the sensitivity surrounding the matter during that era. Remember, it was the 1950s. Although DNA analysis was unavailable then, examiners carefully stored a swab for a future investigation. Additionally, evidence of multiple injuries implied a vicious struggle between Patricia and her assailant. On that very day, investigators formally questioned a potential suspect. This suspect, an airman who was friends with Dwayne, had their identity kept confidential. Patricia's mother had sensed Dwayne's distress a few days earlier, prompting a conversation where he expressed feeling troubled and unable to rid himself of constant grief. He confided about a recent disagreement with a friend. Many believed it was he whom the authorities questioned as a potential suspect. However, this suspect eventually fell out of suspicion. For more than 3 decades, the case remained unsolved without any substantial leads. In November of 1989, investigators made a pivotal decision to search for the bullet, turning their attention to a nearby tree. Cascade County Sheriff Barry Michelotti revealed the tree's significance as this cottonwood potentially holds the bullet inside it, highlighting the tree's central role in the case. The recovery of this bullet held immense importance, aiming to uncover the weapon's caliber, and possibly connected to firearms seized in other incidents over the years, offering a potential breakthrough in the investigation. Sergeant Dick Duncan knew about the prior unsuccessful attempts to X-ray the tree because of the challenges posed by its immense size and bark density. Towering at approximately 80 feet with a trunk diameter of around 4.5 feet, this tree stood as an obstacle. But this time they had an audacious plan: to shave off approximately 33 growth rings from the lower portion, anticipating that this action might reveal traces of the bullet's path within the tree, a potential opening or tunnel, a silent witness to the past. Their plan paid off, and the authorities recovered the 33-year-old evidence. Optimism surged when investigators retrieved bullets from the cottonwood tree, reigniting hopes of uncovering the perpetrator. Yet these hopes were quickly dashed as the bullets failed to match with any firearm linked to other criminal activities. Despite the absence of significant breakthroughs, the investigation remained in motion, unwavering in its pursuit of every lead. A staggering 35 individuals were interrogated in connection to the case, showcasing the exhaustive efforts invested in seeking justice. Among the potential suspects in the case stood Edward Wayne Edwards, who had a criminal history dating back to 1956 when he was arrested in Montana for burglary. His criminal escapades intensified when he escaped from Akron Prison in 1955, embarking on a spree of gas station robberies nationwide. By 1961, Edwards had secured a spot on the FBI's most wanted list, an honor he held until his capture in 1962. Following his release on parole in 1967, decades passed before he resurfaced in the legal spotlight. In 2009, he faced arrest once more, subsequently confessing in 2010 to brutally taking away the lives of Billy LaVaca, Judah Straub, Tim Hack, Kelly Drew, and Danny Loglochner. All the victims were young adults close to the age of Dwayne and Patricia. His dark deeds extended further as he admitted to influencing a U.S. Army soldier, Danny Boy, to go AWOL before ending his life too and burying him in a shallow grave. Although sentenced to be executed in March 2, 2011 for his involvement in Danny Boyle's demise, Edward Wayne Edwards passed away in prison nearly a month later due to natural causes, evading the full extent of justice for his string of heinous crimes. The link between Edwards and the tragic deaths of Dwayne and Patricia was rooted in his disturbing modus operandi. Edwards had a chilling pattern of targeting couples in lovers' lanes, eerily similar to the location where Patricia and Dwayne met their untimely end. This unsettling connection raised suspicions that Edwards could be involved in their deaths. Another suspect under investigation was James Joseph Whitey Bulger, a notorious criminal in the area. Bulger's criminal history, dating back to 1951, included an arrest related to a misconduct case involving a similar assault to the one suffered by Patricia. During the period when the tragic end of Patricia and Dwayne transpired, Bulger was documented to have been present in the area. However, despite his proximity to the crime scenes, no substantial evidence surfaced to conclusively implicate him in the incidents. As the passage of time dimmed any hope for fresh leads, the pursuit of the elusive perpetrator hit an impasse. However, in 2012, a glimmer of renewed hope emerged when Sergeant John Cadner, taking control as the head of detectives for the CCSO, was tasked with resurrecting this cold case. Sergeant Cadner knew the crucial importance of the DNA evidence extracted from a swab 56 years ago. This key sample, originally sent to the State Crime Lab in 2001 by Detective Phil Madison during his tenure, only proved the DNA did not match Dwayne's genetic profile. Therefore, it was cataloged in CODE's Combined DNA Index System. The database, unfortunately, it failed to yield any promising matches, leaving the case to go cold again. Sergeant Cadner teamed up with Bode Technology to recreate the DNA sample when he got the case. By 2019, they had successfully made the sample again. This time, they did not just compare it with the samples in codes. They also checked it against DNA from regular people in open-source DNA databases. These databases are used by people who want to learn about their family history. Just a year before, in 2018, the Golden State offender was caught because some of his family members had given their DNA to a similar open-source DNA database. This helped identify and arrest him. The sample Sergeant Cadner uploaded matched 3 individuals. Investigators reached out to them and their families. They collected DNA samples and found that an individual named Kenneth Gould was the closest match to the foreign DNA obtained from Patricia Schwab. Sergeant Cadner expressed, "Was amazing because after 65 years, we finally had a lead and a location to explore. Everything was just theories before this. Now we had a solid lead and a name. It completely shifted the case's dynamics." Authorities encountered a new hurdle. Kenneth Gould had passed away in 2007, and authorities could not exhume his remains to get a DNA sample. Kenneth Gould was cremated in 2007. This presented a challenge, yet they contacted Kenneth Gould's children explaining the situation and the case. Surprisingly, the children agreed to provide their DNA for comparison. Initially unsure of their response, investigators were pleasantly surprised by their full cooperation. Sergeant Cadner shared, "I was not certain how they would react when I approached them about their dad being a suspect." Kenneth Gould hailed from Great Falls and was recognized for riding his horses around the Vineyard Road area where Patricia's remains were discovered. Intriguingly, he had resided close to Patricia's parents at one point, yet there was no apparent link between him and either Patricia or Dwayne. Notably, when Gould was 25 years old, he married a 16-year-old, the same age Patricia was at the time of the slayings. A month after Patricia and Dwayne's tragic end, Gould abruptly altered the course of his life. He uprooted his entire existence, relocating his family first to Tracy, then to Geraldine, and later to Hamilton before eventually leaving the state of Montana entirely, settling in Missouri without any intention of returning. Kenneth Gould was deemed the most likely suspect in the slayings. However, because he had passed away, his culpability could not be conclusively established without a proper trial. Sergeant Cadner shared his view that, although they could not definitively prove Kenneth Gould's guilt due to his passing, the accumulated evidence strongly pointed to him as the prime suspect. He acknowledged that while they couldn't physically place the weapon in Gould's hand, the overall information and circumstances provided a high level of certainty in his involvement. Kenneth Gould's daughter subtly suggested to Sergeant Cadner that her father may have had hidden secrets, implying that there were aspects of his life that no one else knew about. Once Gould was identified as the suspect, the families of Dwayne Bogle and Patricia Kalitsky were finally approached, offering them the closure they had long sought. While they were relieved to receive answers after more than 6 decades, the revelation also reopened painful memories for the families, particularly those who had personal connections to the couple. Sergeant Cadner empathetically noted the families are experiencing a mix of emotions. Is a bittersweet moment. Dwayne and Patricia were vibrant and well-liked by many. Investigators investigated deeply in this case, leaving a part of themselves in the pursuit of justice, which makes this closure heartfelt yet challenging. Patricia Kalitsky's sister, the sole surviving member of her family, had succumbed to advanced dementia by the time the identity of the perpetrator was revealed. The Bogle family had endured years of turmoil with speculations about Dwayne's fate, including unverified rumors linking him to the mob. Dwayne's niece, Karen Bogle McCarthy, who was 54 at the time of the revelation, reflected on the impact of modern technology on their generation. She acknowledged that while technological advancements had their merits, they also reignited deeply buried wounds that had started to heal. In an interview, Edgar Wilson, Kenneth Gould's neighbor for a decade in Missouri, expressed utter disbelief about the accusations against Gould. Wilson described Gould as mild-mannered, non-confrontational, and inherently good, portraying him as a genuinely good person who did not engage in vices like drinking or causing trouble. During his time in Missouri, Gould resided on a farm with his family, earning respect as an exceptional horse trainer. He also tended to sheep and goats at his farm. An unsubstantiated theory is that Kenneth Gould secretly loved Patricia, and when all of a sudden Patricia fell for Dwayne, and only after a month of dating they were thinking of marrying, is when Kenneth decided to take the matters into his own hands. He confronted the couple on the lover's lane, and when he saw the couple involved in intimacy in the car, it enraged Kenneth Gould, and he held the couple at gunpoint. He tied up Dwayne with his own belt and threatened him to leave Patricia. The theory that Kenneth Gould could have been motivated by an obsession with Patricia raises several intriguing but troubling questions. The significant age gap between Kenneth and Patricia, almost 13 years, does seem unusual, especially considering the societal norms and personal dynamics at the time. However, it is worth noting that Kenneth had married his wife when she was 16 years old, just 4 years before the tragedy involving Patricia. This fact could suggest a pattern of behavior or a predisposition toward younger women, which complicates the investigation into his possible involvement. The irregularities in the theory, particularly the timing and his history of marrying a much younger woman, add to the complexity of understanding the true motive behind Patricia's abduction and murder. The details of his relationship with his wife and how it might have influenced his actions toward Patricia provide a troubling backdrop that could point to unresolved psychological or emotional issues. Ultimately, these elements suggest that the case might involve deeper, more personal motivations tied to Gould's own life and actions. But without further evidence, these theories remain speculative. Kenneth Gould's daughter's words about hidden secrets carry a weight of uncertainty. Was she implying that her father had an undisclosed obsession with Patricia, or was it merely a passing reflection on the complexities of human nature? Without further insight into her statement, it remains a haunting ambiguity. The motive behind the crime remains elusive, especially with the passing of 3 individuals who could have provided clarity. Was the murder the result of a love triangle gone wrong? Or did it stem from a moment of uncharacteristic violence from someone who otherwise seemed benign? The question also lingers, was it the act of one perpetrator, or did others play a role in this brutal crime? With the passing of those who might have unraveled these mysteries, these questions remain unanswered, leaving the case shrouded in the shadows of uncertainty. Lam Yohe, better known as Elisa Lam to her peers at the University of British Columbia and the broader public, was a bright, thoughtful, and creative student. Her interests in fashion and talent for writing were overshadowed by the struggles of bipolar disorder and mental health challenges, which many believe played a role in her disappearance and tragic death. For almost 9 years, both amateur sleuths and professional investigators have searched tirelessly, scrutinizing every detail in hopes of uncovering the truth behind Elisa Lam's demise. Despite their efforts and the available evidence, these investigations have only raised more questions than answers, leaving the mystery unresolved and open to anyone willing to take on the challenge. As a hope to provide a more substantial reasoning built upon observable evidence and situational analysis, this is an examination of the bizarre circumstances surrounding Elisa Lam's confusing death. Elisa Lam was born on April 30, 1991 in Vancouver, British Columbia to 2 immigrants from Hong Kong, David and Yenna Lam. Her parents opened up a restaurant in Burnaby, Canada, and the family helped operate the popular dining spots called Paul's Restaurant for years. In 2010, Elisa started her first blog on the internet titled E.T. Fields. Throughout the next couple of years, she used the platform to showcase her love of fashion and clothing, often posting magazine articles and fashion-related photography. Elisa Lam often spoke candidly about her struggles with mental illness, expressing concern that her academic transcript, marked by dropped classes and irregular attendance, might reflect poorly on her. Despite these challenges, she wrote deeply and thoughtfully about psychology, emotions, and the human spirit. Her blog served as a canvas for her introspection, showcasing a bright mind and a reflective thinker. In her final post on her blog, Etherfields, Elisa announced a shift in her online presence to Tumblr, launching a page she titled Nouvelle, meaning News New. On this platform, Elisa shared thousands of posts, including her own writings and curated works from other authors, alongside an array of evocative images. It was apparent on Tumblr that she held deep-rooted interests in classical books and films, experimental art and design and fashion and culture. Sprinkled amongst these fascinations were bits of dark and brooding images, hinting at a more personal sadness and perhaps conflicted mind full of monsters, melancholy, and misery. In fact, Elisa did have a history with a couple of psychological disorders. This narrative kept under wraps by her family for months after her disappearance and death. Specifically, she was diagnosed for bipolar disorder and depression. Bipolar disorder is a mental health condition characterized by episodes of depression as well as periods of unusually elevated mood, known as mania or hypomania. Elisa Lam managed her condition with medications like dexedrine, Wellbutrin, and mood stabilizers. For much of her life, she coped with her struggles effectively, showing no significant signs of instability or risk to herself or others. Up until her ill-fated trip to Los Angeles in 2013, Elisa displayed resilience and functionality despite her challenges. It's essential to remember Elisa Lam as more than her diagnosis, a complex, thoughtful, and creative individual who lived with courage and humanity. She was a promising student at the University of British Columbia and obviously had a plethora of ideas about the world. She had a family, hobbies, and most importantly, a future. Unfortunately, it was cut short of its potential as the mystery of her fate began to unravel in December of 2012. Now let's explore the timeline of events leading to Elisa's death. On December 21, 2012, Elisa gives the first recorded mention of her desire to travel to the West Coast and visit a school in Santa Clara for potential transfer. On December 28, 2012, Elisa Lam mentioned on her Tumblr that she had misplaced her cell phone. As the new year arrived, she shared plans for her upcoming West Coast tour on January 5, 2013, marking the first time she suggested meeting people she'd connected with online. A few days later, on January 7th, Elisa booked her flight for the trip and posted a cryptic and unsettling message about the future on Tumblr. On January 9th, she revealed that paranoia had driven her to create a new Facebook account, her fifth, and she reposted a blurb she had written earlier that day. These entries provide a glimpse into her state of mind leading up to her tragic journey. Before the blurb is an introduction in which she claims, "This is the very start of my depression, and today I am feeling very low." Fast forward to January 18th when Elisa supposedly arrives in Vancouver on her tour. For days later, on January 22nd, she supposedly traveled to San Diego for the next leg in her journey after missing her initial flight while getting lost in the airport. On January 24th, Elisa posts on Tumblr that her trip so far has consisted mostly of activities and actions that she participates in back at home on a normal schedule. With this post, she hints at her later actions in Los Angeles when she says, on January 27th, 2013, Elisa Lam posted on Tumblr about spending time with friends at a speakeasy. She mentioned losing another phone, though this one wasn't hers. It was a borrowed BlackBerry from a friend for her trip. The following day, January 28th, Elisa arrived in Los Angeles and checked into the Cecil Hotel, a budget-friendly accommodation near Skid Row known for its dark history. By January 30th, Elisa's roommates reported concerns about her odd behavior, prompting hotel staff to relocate her to a private room on the 5th floor to avoid disturbing other guests. On January 31st, the day she was scheduled to leave LA, Elisa was last seen by hotel staff and a bookstore clerk, Katie Orphan. Orphan described her as lively, outgoing, and friendly despite being alone. This would be the final confirmed sighting of Elisa Lam. Orphan also said she was talking about what books she was getting and whether or not what she was getting would be too heavy for her to carry around as she traveled. Because Elisa was supposed to check out of the Cecil Hotel that day and travel to Santa Cruz for the last leg on her tour, both her parents were waiting for a phone call. In fact, Elisa had called her parents almost every night during her trip despite losing her temporary cell phone. After they heard nothing from their daughter, Mr. and Mrs. Lam flew to Los Angeles to file a missing persons reports and assist the Los Angeles Police Department in their search. Throughout the first week of February, both the Lam couple and the LAPD scoured the Cecil and the surrounding areas for any trace of Elisa. Tracking dogs brought in to aid in the search for Elisa Lam were unable to pick up her scent, leaving investigators without leads during the critical early days. Her hotel room revealed no signs of struggle, disturbance, or any suspicious items, deepening the mystery surrounding her sudden disappearance. On February 6, 2013, the LAPD issued an official statement online about Elisa's case, providing her description and urging the public to report any sightings or information. The following day, February 7th, a press conference was held, but no substantial tips emerged. On February 14th, the LAPD released a chilling piece of evidence: an elevator surveillance video from February 1st. The footage showed Elisa entering the elevator, pressing several buttons, and behaving erratically, peering out into the hallway, gesturing strangely, and seemingly hiding from someone unseen. The bizarre clip quickly went viral, capturing the attention of amateur sleuths and media worldwide. The clip was unsettling to say the least, but gave investigators one more glimpse into Lam's final sighting and brought the case to worldwide attention. The missing person search would soon come to an end, however, when on February 19th, a Cecil hotel worker responded to multiple guest complaints about funny-smelling water and low faucet pressure. The employee went up to the rooftop water system, peered into the open tank, and discovered Elisa Lam's naked body floating face up. LAPD was immediately notified, and the water tank soon became a crime scene. A couple of days thereafter, on February 21st, the Los Angeles coroner's office issued a label of Elisa Lam's death as accidental due to the consequence of drowning with bipolar disorder, as a finding of other conditions contributing, but not related to the immediate cause of death. In June 2013, the Los Angeles coroner's office released the full autopsy and toxicology reports related to Elisa Lam's case. While the findings did not introduce any groundbreaking revelations, they confirmed that Elisa's body was discovered unclothed in the water tank, with her clothes, keys, and watch also retrieved from the tank, all covered in a sandy residue. Despite the official ruling that her death was accidental, the reports failed to quell public curiosity or skepticism. Over the years, the case has inspired an endless stream of theories, ranging from plausible scenarios to far-fetched conspiracies. These discussions, fueled by the enigmatic elevator footage and unanswered questions, have continued to overshadow the coroner's conclusions, ensuring Elisa Lam's story remains a haunting enigma. Many questioned the police investigation and even more saw possible holes in the final reports. Regardless, the timeline of Elisa Lam's death and its direct series of events blossomed into the most talked-about case of the 21st century. Without a doubt, the most controversial and scrutinized piece of the Elisa Lam case is the 4-minute CCTV footage that the LAPD pulled from one of the Cecil Hotel surveillance tapes situated in the upper corner of a main elevator carriage in the northern corridor. The video is a bit grainy and segments of it are hard to clearly make out. But one thing is for certain: Elisa Lam is the subject of the footage and is clearly reacting to something. The enigmatic elevator footage of Elisa Lam leaves an unsettling impression that's difficult to shake. While the exact reasons behind her actions will likely never be fully understood, the clip takes on an even stranger dimension when viewed through the lens of her apparent unease. Her cautious glances out of the elevator suggest she might have felt she was being followed. At times, it seems as though she could be speaking, perhaps to herself, adding another layer of ambiguity. The seemingly arbitrary pressing of buttons upon her entry, the empty hallways, and her indistinct gestures and movements create a puzzling scene. The video resists any straightforward interpretation, leaving viewers with more questions than answers, even after multiple viewings. There have also been some controversy surrounding the tape's origins. Some people across the internet claim the footage skips 1 minute of the timecode, but because of its low quality, it's not easy to point out. Others say the footage itself has been tampered with, purposefully pixelating Elisa's mouth at various points. But these reports have either been denied or flat out ignored by professionals. One thing is for sure: the elevator footage from February 1st, 2013 depicting the last known images of Elisa Lam have conjured both worthy concern and far-fetched conspiracies, and remains the single most intriguing piece of evidence linked to the case. Since the day Elisa Lam went missing, the CCTV tapes were released and her body was discovered on the rooftop of the Cecil Hotel. Numerous theories have emerged worldwide, each attempting to unravel the perplexing mystery of Elisa Lam's death. Many of these speculations delve into the realm of conspiracy, veering away from grounded reasoning. Some suggest she was engaging in an elevator game to access alternate dimensions. Others propose she was influenced by supernatural entities, encountered paranormal phenomena, or even made contact with extraterrestrial beings. These ideas, while imaginative, lean heavily on hyperbole and coincidence rather than tangible evidence. They often serve to sensationalize Elisa's tragic end, transforming it into a narrative of science fiction or the occult, without offering any substantiated connection to the real-world facts of the case. For example, the location of the Cecil Hotel is in Skid Row of downtown Los Angeles. The area is infamous for its high crime rates and suspicious activity. Drug peddling and violent crime are common both outside and inside of the hotel, which has its own history of murder and suicide. In 1985, serial killer Richard Ramirez, dubbed as the Night Stalker, stayed in one of the 600 rooms of the Cecil in the midst of a killing spree that ended in the deaths of 13 women. Another homicide suspect, Jack Unterberger, stayed in the hotel in 1991. The Cecil Hotel, infamous for its dark history, was a frequent site for tragic events, including suicides in the 1950s and 1960s, when individuals leaped from its rooftop. It was also the setting of a chilling unsolved case, the brutal 1964 murder of Pigeon Goldie Osgood, a beloved former telephone operator found mutilated in her room. Despite the macabre history of the hotel, none of its past tragedies directly connect to Elisa Lam's death. A more grounded theory suggests she may have been followed during her stay in Los Angeles, pursued through the Cecil's hallways, and ultimately murdered, with her body placed in the water tank by an unknown assailant. At first glance, this explanation appeared plausible. If you go back to multiple Tumblr posts that Elisa made throughout the end of 2012 and beginning of 2013, she was conscious about her outspoken nature and feared that one day her mouth would get her into trouble. At various points, she wrote about unsettling anxieties. One post read, "I'm going out tonight. I really hope no creeper comes near me." At least twice, Elisa was convinced trouble was lurking around the corner at the fault of her tongue, saying, "I really need to be removed from society before my big mouth gets me in trouble and I get beaten up." Elisa Lam herself admitted in her writings, "My mouth is my downfall and it will get me in trouble. I already do so many stupid things. I have trouble knowing where boundaries are, and it seems I always make the biggest mistakes at the worst possible moments." She reflected on how her impulsive actions often led to unintended consequences, particularly when attempting to cut corners or act without thinking. Additionally, she acknowledged a tendency to spark arguments with strangers, which raises the possibility that she might have encountered a confrontation in the wrong place at the wrong time during that winter in Los Angeles. This context adds another layer of complexity to the case, especially when paired with her peculiar behavior observed in the infamous elevator footage. After she enters for the first time and presses the floor buttons, she waits a few moments before slowly approaching the elevator's door frame. She then quickly sticks her head out in the hallway and glances from side to side in a hurried manner, then pulling back into the elevator. She pins herself against the wall and then into the corner, acting as if she was avoiding the vision of someone from outside. She goes back to the door frame once more and again, cautiously sticks her head into the open. From here, she makes a series of random movements before pressing more buttons. When Elisa returns outside for the final time, she appears to be communicating either verbally or with hand gestures, but no one is seen in the footage. This part of her movements could suggest that she was attempting to hide from someone, though her erratic footwork and dazed demeanor in the latter half of the video complicate the idea that she was actively fleeing from danger. These observations, combined with her Tumblr posts, raise the possibility that someone else could have been involved in her death. However, despite these suspicions, there are several counterarguments that suggest her death was not a homicide. For example, the absence of bruises or signs of bodily harm on Elisa's body seems to rule out the possibility of an assault. This discrepancy leaves the cause of her death open to interpretation and continues to fuel ongoing debate. All of her belongings were accounted for besides the long-lost cell phone, ruling out robbery or attempted robbery. The eyewitness testimonies by hotel employees and the bookstore clerk claimed she was completely alone and showed no signs of struggle or distress regarding another person. Cameras captured no other suspects around the time of Elisa's recording, and her lack of relationships in a new territory helped rule out a planned or just stated murder, as she had very little friends back at home, let alone Los Angeles. In the end, there was zero evidence confirming these theories about murder or foul play. This leads to a contradiction in the findings of the Los Angeles coroner's office. While the medical examiners prefaced their final conclusions with a disclaimer about the limited evidence, particularly due to the lack of blood samples for testing, they simultaneously state that the police investigation ruled out foul play. However, they also claimed that a thorough review of the case and consultations did not suggest an intention for self-harm. This creates a catch-22. The evidence doesn't conclusively point to either homicide or suicide, leaving the cause of Elisa Lam's death ambiguous and fueling ongoing debates and suspicions. The manner of death is classified as accident. So if there was no harmful intention either by Lam herself or a second suspect, then how exactly did Elisa accidentally climb up a massive cylinder, discover it was a water tank, lift up an incredibly heavy lid and jump into the dark water? And if the lid was already opened, why did she choose to climb in as a response? Murder and suicide are polar opposite explanations that have both been deemed inapplicable. Believers that Elisa was killed by somebody else linger over the fact that the rooftop access was protected by alarms on the doors and the fact that her accessing the water tanks required agility and strength. This sets a foundation for the theory that Elisa Lam's death was the result of a manic episode induced by her bipolar disorder. The toxicology reports confirmed the presence of medications, specifically antidepressants, in her system, which suggests that her mental state on the day of her death was influenced by these substances. These factors, combined with her previous struggles with the disorder, could have led to erratic behavior, such as her actions in the elevator footage. The presence of the fire escapes and the easy accessibility to the rooftop, where the water tank was located, strengthens the theory that Elisa may have wandered up to the roof during a manic episode, unknowingly climbing into the water tank. Given her mental state, she may not have realized the danger or the impossibility of escaping from it once inside. The lid on the water tank being lighter and easier to open than originally assumed further supports this theory. In this context, Elisa's death could be viewed as a tragic accident, where her mental health struggles, combined with the environment of the Cecil Hotel, led to an unfortunate series of events that ultimately resulted in her drowning. One of these drugs was bupropion, known to sometimes cause mania and bipolar disorder. Another mood-stabilizing medicine had metabolites traced to her enzymes, but Elisa's antipsychotic medicine was not found in her system. So in review, Elisa had only taken one of her prescribed drugs the day she passed and had only taken the others recently, if not at all, in the days leading up to her death. The toxicology reports also confirms that Elisa had no alcohol in her system or other recreational drugs. This rules out the possibility that she had been under the influence of substances while on camera in the elevator, or that something such as marijuana, pills, or drunkenness inspired her to climb into the tank. Her liver wasn't tested for rohypnol, and the absence of urine suggests she excreted any potential drugs before reaching the tank. Considering her mental health history and the effects of her prescribed medications, it's important to understand mania. Episodes can involve psychotic symptoms like hallucinations, delusions, and paranoia. One mental health expert described mania as, symptoms of mania also include psychomotor agitation, which involves repetitive, purposeless, or unintentional movements and behaviors. Dr. Daniel Morell reviews in a medical journal that these actions can result in the wringing of the hands, pacing, and taking off clothes repeatedly. All three behaviors were exhibited by Elisa, both in the elevator footage and in or around the water tanks. The fact that Elisa Lam attempted to go to the roof at all could be a response to hallucinations or delusions. What these might have been are unknown, and it would be unfair to Elisa's memory to assume and fictionalize her mental illness. It's crucial to recognize that manic hallucinations can involve all the senses, not just sight, which might explain why Elisa removed her clothing. The combination of irregular medication use, being in a foreign place, and lack of communication with home could have triggered her manic episode. Guests she stayed with reported her odd behavior, which led to her being moved to a private room. The final piece of evidence supporting this theory comes from a confidential source, referred to as Resident A, who wishes to remain anonymous, but their testimony offers further insight into Elisa's state leading up to her disappearance. After hearing about our investigation to the case of Elisa Lam and having little to no prior knowledge of this scenario, Resident A told us that a few years ago, they had a family member in Mexico commit suicide as a result of manic depression or bipolar disorder. Resident A stated that this family member died from drowning after plunging into the depths of a similar industrial water tank. Resident A also stated that this was a common occurrence for the family member who was a result of their bipolar disorder. Seeked out bodies of water whenever suffering from bouts of mania. Resident A confirmed that this family member was about 35 years old when they passed away, but had been suffering from mental illness for over a decade and had an inclination to run away and find attraction to water throughout the years. While this case has no direct relation to Elisa Lam, it's peculiar that both instances involve a confirmed bipolar subject who, as a result of their condition, drowned because of an unconscious gravitation to water. While there is limited research on phenomena like Elisa Lam's case, it's clear that her selection of the Cecil Hotel's water tank may not have been a mystery, but rather a tragic result of her psychological illness. After considering all available evidence, scientific research, and social patterns, it seems the chief coroner's initial report holds true that Elisa Lam died accidentally from drowning as a consequence of bipolar disorder. Though various theories were proposed, the lack of concrete evidence and their speculative nature led them to be dismissed. The case has captivated people worldwide because it's often difficult to accept simple, tragic explanations for unsettling events. Psychological disorders are heavily stigmatized even today, but also very misunderstood. People don't want to accept that Elisa Lam was suffering from hallucinations due to bipolar disorder because that's only in her mind, and they struggle accepting such indistinction. Instead, it's far easier to tell our own versions of what we want to have happened. Something more fantastical or intriguing than mental illness. For example, some people believe another party was involved because Lam's cell phone was missing and her Tumblr remained active for months following her death. The simple explanation for some of the confusion around Elisa Lam's case lies in the fact that her original phone was lost weeks before her trip. Additionally, Tumblr accounts often populate with posts similar to previous content for a while after they go dark, which may have added to the confusion. Many struggle to comprehend how Lisa could make it to the rooftop and into the water tanks undetected. However, this is clarified in the undisputed material facts in the motion for summary judgment documents filed after the Cecil Hotel was sued. According to Box 10, the rooftop access door is equipped with an electronic alarm system that alerts hotel staff when the door is opened. Box 14 notes that the alarm for this door did not go off at any point in January or February 2013. This means that Elisa used one of the 3 fire escapes to reach the rooftop, which was proven possible by an international guest at the Cecil Hotel via a YouTube demonstration. In addition, the motion for summary judgment reports in Box 20 that someone could theoretically access the water tank by climbing to the top of an elevator utility room and jumping down on the water tank from above. This photo depicts the elevator utility room in question, which allows easy access from a red set of stairs and a joined ladder. The leap from that structure to the water tanks is also quite negligible as seen put to scale with the size of a human portrayed here. In terms of the elevator video, our story-centric minds want to fill in the hallways on either side of the elevator with monsters and perpetrators and supernatural phenomena. In the end, what truly happened on the night of February 1st, 2013, remains a mystery only Elisa Lam herself could fully understand. What we can trust is that the unpredictability of mental illness, particularly her struggle with bipolar disorder, likely played a significant role in her disappearance. Elisa, a young woman grappling with an identity crisis and growing anxiety about her life's purpose, had been open about feeling the onset of depression and acknowledging the impulsive and reckless tendencies that could indicate a manic episode. These were signs she herself recognized, suggesting her mental state likely contributed to her tragic fate. Elisa Lam was at an age when many individuals begin to experience breakthrough symptoms of conditions like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, which can be triggered by stress or changes in environment. The unfamiliarity of Skid Row, combined with insomnia and a lack of proper medication, likely contributed to her confusion and eventual manic episode. There is no single factor that led to her tragic death. It was a combination of her mental health struggles, circumstances, and the viral nature of the bizarre video footage that sparked unwarranted conspiracy theories. This examination of her case should serve as a step toward reducing the stigma around mental illness and fostering a more compassionate understanding of her challenges. Elisa Lam was indeed a remarkable individual, full of potential, with her own passions, interests, and dreams. Her story reminds us of the importance of supporting and caring for those who face mental health challenges. It's crucial to continue the conversation around mental illness, to offer help and understanding before situations spiral into something as tragic as Elisa's. By honoring her memory, we can foster a more compassionate society and work toward preventing similar tragedies from occurring in the future. Christine Jessup in the peaceful, tight-knit community of Queensville, Ontario. The small town had an idyllic sense of safety, with familiar faces and unlocked doors. Parents like Janet Jessup often allowed their children to play outside without worry, trusting that their small town would keep them safe. On Wednesday, October 3, 1984, Janet didn't feel the need to rush home to greet her 9-year-old daughter, Christine Jessup, when school let out. Life in Queensville was so tranquil that such a routine felt entirely normal until Christine never came home that day. Christine Jessup was an adventurous and independent child full of curiosity and imagination. She enjoyed exploring the graveyard behind her home, spending hours lost in her own world. Like her older brother Kenny, Christine had a passion for baseball, but her true love was for animals. She found comfort and companionship in her dog, Freckles, and even kept a pet frog named Harold, which she housed in the damp, earthy basement of her home. Christine's playful spirit and love for animals painted a picture of a young girl with a deep sense of wonder and attachment to the world around her. On October 3, 1984, Christine Jessup returned home from school, filled with excitement to share her impressive music class records with her mother and brother. She knew that her father, Bob Jessup, would not be home, as he was serving an 18-month jail term for defrauding elderly family friends and was incarcerated at the Toronto East Detention Center. Upon entering the family's 2-story farmhouse, quickly realized that neither her mom nor her brother was home. Despite this, her cheerful demeanor likely remained as she awaited their return, unaware of the tragic events that were about to unfold. Christine wasn't overly concerned. She found a coin in the change jar and decided to head to the nearby store to buy a pack of gum. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Earlier that day, she had made plans to meet her friend, Leslie Chipman, at the park just across the street from the store around 4 p.m. At exactly 4 p.m., Christine arrived at the park, excited to meet her friend, unaware that this would be the last time she was seen. As planned, Leslie Chipman went to the park and waited for Christine to show up. Meanwhile, 10 minutes past 4 p.m., Janet Jessup arrived home with her son Kenny. She noticed Christine's red bicycle lying on its side outside the home, and its kickstand was damaged. Upon entering the house, they noticed that Christine's jacket was hanging on a hook that was higher than she could normally reach. The mail and newspaper had been brought inside, and her school bag was placed neatly on the counter. As the sun began to set around 5 p.m., Christine still hadn't returned home, which was unusual for her. This raised immediate concerns, as she was typically prompt and dependable. A panicked Janet decided to go look for her in the areas she loved to hang out. She went to the park and the graveyard, calling out her daughter's name. She placed a call through to Christine's friends, not excluding Leslie Chipman. Leslie, however, told Janet that she had planned a park date with Christine, but she never showed up, so she went home after waiting for hours. On hearing this, Janet tried so hard not to panic, but it seemed impossible. Janet felt a deep sense of unease. She and Christine shared a close bond, doing everything together. Though she allowed her children some freedom, she always knew where they were. Now, as the hours passed with no word from Christine, she began to regret not being home in time to greet her daughter after school. That feeling of unease quickly grew into a sharp worry, as something just didn't feel right. Just 20 minutes of delay was all it took for Christine, her sweet, sensitive, feisty, adorable daughter, to disappear with no trace. The day was getting dark, and Janet decided to call the York Regional Police for help. At the time, children going missing was a common case, but the cases were always solved with answers provided within 48 hours. Parental abduction or child runaway was more often than not the usual explanation for a missing child at the time. But in the case of Christine Jessup, both scenarios did not make any sense. Both of her parents were accounted for, and Christine was never a type of child to run away from home. Back then, whenever Christine went to spend the weekend with her grandparents, she would always call home to hear her family's voices and say hello. In the 1980s, the York police force was small, with only one officer for every 860 residents. There were no specialized units for major crimes, and the force had never dealt with a case involving child kidnapping or murder. Their inexperience quickly became evident as they took on the case, leading to complications in the investigation from the outset. According to reports, when a police arrived at the Jessup's house, he removed Christine Jessup's jacket from the hook for closer inspection. Investigators were also said to have come in through the back and side doors of the house. The plastic bag used to wrap the newspaper was also thrown in the trash without being checked for fingerprints, which could possibly belong to the killer. Also, the Jessup's home was not restricted as a crime scene, as neighbors were seen coming in and out of the home, unintentionally touching one or two things that might have compromised any kind of crucial evidence if Christine Jessup had been abducted from her home. The police set up a search party which also included residents of Queensville, to help carry out a series of random searches of the area. The search yielded no results. Christine was never found. It was as if she had vanished from the surface of the earth without a trace. Her disappearance shocked the people of Queensville, who were used to looking out for one another. The community was left in disbelief, wondering how a 9-year-old girl could simply disappear without a single clue. According to Mark Johnson, one of the search party volunteers, the residents of Queensville were full of anxiety and concern. In her words, she said, "There is a feeling of disbelief that something like this could happen here." Due to how severe the situation was, Bob Jessup was later released from jail on humanitarian grounds. Bob and Janet then pleaded with the public to help in their daughter's return. The police knew that kidnappings are not just done randomly. The police believed that Christine Jessup's abduction was likely committed by someone who had an existing connection with the family. They asked the Jessups to provide a list of people who had access to their home when no family members were around. One of the names provided was Calvin Hoover, a close family friend who worked with Bob Jessup. Just a day after Christine's disappearance, Calvin's wife, Heather Hoover, traveled to Queensville to offer comfort and support to Janet, helping the family in any way she could. Sergeant Raymond Bunce of the York Police had an interview with Heather. Her alibi was that she was at her workplace on the day of Christine Jessup's disappearance. When asked about the whereabouts of her husband on that day, she said Calvin Hoover had been at work too. After responding to every question thrown at her, Heather took permission to leave, telling the officer that her husband and her children were home waiting for her and that she needed to hurry home. However, Calvin Hoover was never interviewed. Calvin Hoover was a man with dark hair, protruding front teeth, and a slim face, which appeared even slimmer when he wore his oversized glasses. At the time of Christine Jessup's murder, he was a 28-year-old tradesman from Scarborough with a penchant for drinking, partying, and gambling. Despite his flaws, Hoover had a certain charm that filled the room when he entered. To strangers and co-workers, he appeared friendly. But those who knew him more intimately described him as a selfish person, more concerned with his own interests than others. He also had a tendency toward revenge, a trait that became evident to his close family in France. Calvin Hoover met his wife, Heather, in the mid-1970s. After they got married, Calvin adopted Heather's 2 boys, and later they had 2 more boys together. Their small home was located in a housing development just west of the Toronto Zoo. Calvin and Heather Hoover worked at Eastern Independent Telecom, a small communications firm in Markham that supplied telephone wiring for businesses all over the area. While Heather worked in the dispatch department, Calvin worked in the installations under Bob Jessup, Christine's father, who was the lead installer at the time. Calvin Hoover's job, which allowed him to move around freely, gave him the opportunity to leave work for hours at a time without providing an explanation. Over time, he developed a close friendship with Bob Jessup, and the two families frequently gathered for barbecues and birthday parties. Janet and Heather also grew close, forming a strong bond and finding in each other a best friend. Janet had even nicknamed Heather. She jokingly called her the Goofy Newfie. Also, Heather Hoover would many a times babysit Christine Jessup, who often called her Auntie Heather. Regardless of the 50 kilometers distance between the two families' homes, Janet and Heather would frequently meet to catch up over a pot of tea and watch their children play. They had even had one of such visit 2 days before Christine disappeared. On the October 1st, 1984, Janet Jessup took her 2 kids, Kenny and Christine, to go visit the Hoovers. Lately, she had been exhausted, taking care of 2 children while her husband was in jail. She needed moral support and felt her friend, Heather, could give her some encouraging words. When she arrived at the Hoovers' home, Janet told Heather that she and Kenny would be going to visit Bob in jail in 2 days. It is however possible that Calvin Hoover overheard Janet's conversation with his wife and knew Christine would be home alone. Or maybe Heather Hoover had innocently told Calvin what Janet had said about going to visit her husband with Kenny. Either way, 2 days later, on the October 3rd, 1984, Calvin Hoover decided to do the unthinkable. The theory was that since Christine Jessup knew Calvin Hoover as a family friend, she probably entered his car without much convincing. He probably told her he was driving her to where her family was, which of course, she would have been excited about. Days went by without the Jessup's family, and the police knowing that the culprit was right under their noses. The case went cold for a while, and all the Jessups did was to pray for the safe return of their daughter and sister. Christmas came, but without Christine around, the Jessup's house didn't feel like celebrating. No Christmas tree, and Kenny only got few presents. By the time it was December 31st, 1984, 3 months later, while people prepared to enter into the new year in the village of Sunderland, just 56 kilometers east of Queensville, a man named Fred Patterson and his 2 daughters had gone looking for their dog on the large, wooded property next to their house. A while later, Patterson could spot something unfamiliar that looked like a heap of garbage beside a half-dug pit. On getting closer, he realized with horror that it was a badly decomposed corpse of a little girl. The corpse had suffered deep multiple stab wounds to the chest, and these, according to the medical examiner, were later determined to be the official cause of death. The body wore a beige turtleneck sweater with a blue pullover and a blouse with missing buttons. Close to the body's right foot was a pair of little girl's panties. A recorder which had the name, Christine Jessup, written on it, was also found laying in a tall grass. When Christine's family heard the sad news, they became inconsolable. Their painful waiting and wondering had come to an end, but now, there is a lifetime of mourning ahead. Since body was found in Durham region, the case was transferred from the York Police to the Durham Regional Police, where Inspector Robert Brown then began handling the case. Questions such as why Christine's body was found in Sunderland bugged the police. Sunderland was all country roads, farmland and forests, which was not really far or close from Queensville. The police was not aware that Calvin Hoover must have chosen that area to commit his atrocities because of his familiarity with the area. He was said to have had a school friend who lived just a few kilometers away from the crime scene. Calvin and his friend would often meet to go kayaking and backcountry camping. Calvin already knew the area like the palm of his hands. He chose to take Christine few meters into the dense forest where he would not be interrupted or seen by passing motorists. Inspector Brown worked day and night on the case. He divided his detectives into 2 teams. They worked tirelessly to find the culprit. They followed all leads except the accumulated boxes of notes containing leads from the York Regional Police investigation. This box had a notebook in which the name and address of Calvin Hoover was written, but investigators from the Durham Regional Police disregarded the work of the York Regional Police, saying their efforts to the case was amateurish and a waste of time. They, however, followed all other leads like the family friend who had uttered strange dark sayings, a kid in the neighborhood who always carried a knife, and even Jane Jessup, but none of these leads gave the answers they wanted. During the investigation, Calvin Hoover's name never came up. On February 14, 1985, Fitz and Shep, who were detectives in one of the teams assigned to the case, visited Christine's family and asked for another list of suspects, people they think could have harmed their daughter. The Jessups, however, could not easily name anyone, but the detectives pressed harder. Just over the fence of their home lived a tight-knit family called the Morans. They had a 25-year-old young boy named Guy Paul. He was kind and respectful and had no criminal record. Guy Paul was never one to drink or smoke. The only law violations he had were only a couple of speeding tickets. However, Janet recollected that Guy Paul did not participate in the search for Christine Jessup when almost everyone in Queensville had. Guy Paul, who played the clarinet and kept honeybees, was regarded as a weird type of guy by the detectives. The Morans were practically good with handiworks. The Moran family, known for their kindness and trustworthiness, was well regarded in the neighborhood. Alphonse Moran, the father, was a retired engineer, Army veteran, and college instructor who preferred to handle all home repairs himself, often with the help of his 6 children. A few weeks before Christine Jessup disappeared, Janet Jessup had asked the Morans if she could list their name and address as an emergency contact for Christine at school. Alphonse Moran gladly agreed. Guy Paul Moran was the second youngest of the Moran children. He possessed the same intelligence as his father. Alphonse taught Guy Paul to weld when he was just 10 years of age. He would often ask his son to assemble some mechanical clocks he had intentionally scattered. They often worked together fixing cars at their backyard. Guy Paul was a young man who loved woodworking and unraveling puzzle-like problems that required patience and focus. He possessed a photographic memory. He often retained the serial numbers of his favorite possessions in case they got stolen. By the time Christine Jessup went missing, Guy Paul was in 3 bands. He loved music and was a prodigy on the clarinet. On February 22, 1985, detectives Fitz and Shep went over to the Morans and engaged Guy Paul in a conversation. He was invited into their car for a casual chat. Guy Paul was asked how well he knew Christine Jessup. He said he did not know her that well. He said there was a huge age gap between the both of them. Christine was more than 16 years his junior, so they never had much cause for interaction. He claimed to have once helped her catch Freckles, her dog, who was running loose. He also recalled talking about gardening to her. And the last interaction he ever had with the Jessups was when he had gone over to help relight the pilot on their furnace. The investigators questioned him about his whereabouts on the day Christine disappeared. Moran said he had been at work, a furniture manufacturing facility at Steeles and Weston, 57 kilometers to the south. However, detectives Fitz and Shep later discovered that Guy Paul had left work early around 3:32 p.m. That meant he could have returned home no earlier than 4:14 p.m., which appeared to be too late to kidnap Christine Jessup before Janet and Kenny got home at 4:10 p.m. They further asked him why he never helped with the search for Christine. Guy Paul Moran said that if Christine's family had asked him, he would have gladly joined in the search, but, at the time, he and his father were installing weeping tile around the home's foundation. Guy Paul's explanation made sense and his alibi was rock solid, but Fitz and Shep saw him as a suspect who was guilty. The detectives further engaged Guy Paul in a playfully conversation, asking him what he thought about Christine Jessup. Guy Paul Moran described her as sweet and innocent. However, he innocently added the statement, but they sometimes grow up to be corrupt, which in a general sense, he is right. As girls become adults, they lose their childlike innocence. But to the detectives, Guy Paul had an evil motive to tarnish Christine's innocence. After their conversation, Guy Paul went home and continued with his normal life. In weeks following Christine Jessup's murder, Calvin Hoover kept his mouth shut. He had the guts to also show up for Christine's funeral and wake, blending with the crowd and offering his condolences to the family. Calvin Hoover was detectives' worst nightmare. He had no criminal background and did not show any form of perverseness. He was not loud or boastful. He made sure he did not draw attention to himself. He seemed careful enough not to have been seen picking up Christine Jessup after school, but at the same time, Calvin Hoover perpetrated his crime in a hurry that he had left a trail of leads. His semen was on Christine's panties, and a single dark hair was found in her necklace. The hair strand was taken to the forensic for testing, but with the intention of finding a match to Guy Paul's DNA. Guy Paul Moran, who had gone to his jazz group for rehearsals, was told that the band leader's daughter, accompanied by her friend and classmate, who happened to be an undercover police officer, was doing a cosmetics class project on hair analysis. She asked people in the jazz group if they would not mind her plucking a few strands of everyone's hair. Guy Paul Moran, who loved her eyes, did not even mind at all. She plucked everyone's hair but later discarded them except for Moran's. The undercover police then handed over Moran's hair to her colleagues Fitz and Shep, who took it to the Center of Forensic Sciences for DNA testing. The forensic scientist never really engaged in any DNA testing. She only microscopically compared the hair color from Christine's necklace to Moran's and concluded that the match was consistent. This was all Detective Shep, and Fitz needs to arrest the wrong guy. In the evening of April 22, 1985, Guy Paul Moran was on his way to band practice when he saw police flashing lights in his rear-view mirror. He thought he was being pulled over because he wasn't wearing his seatbelt. He did not have an idea that 14 other police officers were around the area. 2 cops approached his car, and he was surprised to recognize the detectives he had spoken to about Christine Jessup's weeks before. Thinking it was nothing to stress about, he greeted them, "What's up, guys?" In response, Fitz and Shep told him they were arresting him for the murder of Christine Jessup. A baffled Moran exclaimed, "What? It seems you're describing a dramatic turn of events in the story." As Guy Paul Moran was brought in for questioning, he realized that the situation was spiraling out of control. In his mind, he had made an honest mistake, but now he was facing the full force of the law for a crime he had no part in. Meanwhile, Calvin Hoover, likely keeping tabs on the investigation into Christine Jessup's murder, picked up the newspaper 2 days after Moran's arrest and was shocked to see the headline, "Musician who lives next door charged with Christine Jessup murder." This could be a turning point as Hoover's connection to the case deepens, and the true culprit is yet to be revealed. I bet at that point, he was relieved to see that the search for the real killer would stop for a while or even forever. His wife, Heather Hoover, who had kept a photo of Christine that the little girl had given her, often visited her at the cemetery. During her visit, Calvin would stay by her side, giving out words of comfort as she mourned. After Moran's arrest, Bob and Janet Jessup were shocked by the news that their daughter's killer had been just over the fence of their home. In an interview with the media, Janet said, "Last summer, they came over and gave us honey from their bees. They were so good to us. That's why it's such a shock." For Detectives Fitz and Shep, the easy part of finding a suspect was done. The difficult part was finding strong evidence that could convict Guy Paul Moran for Christine Jessup's murder. They reviewed Moran's rock-solid alibi and concluded that he couldn't have traveled the 57 kilometers from work to his home in time to kidnap Christine Jessup before Janet, and Kenny arrived home at 4:10 p.m. They then retraced Janet and Kenny's route on the day Christine went missing and suggested that Janet must have forgotten the exact time she came home. Janet, however, denied forgetting because she immediately looked at the wall clock when she walked into the house. As time went by, the detective's constant pressure eventually made her reviewed her timing. She then said she returned home around 4:35 p.m. At trial, the prosecutor tabled flimsy evidence just to crown Guy Paul Moran as the murderer he is not. A cigarette butt that was found next to Christine's body was almost presented as an evidence until investigators realized that Moran never smoked. The Moran family, however, told the court that their son had not arrived home on the day Christine went missing until 5:30 p.m., and that was because he had stopped for groceries and gas after work.